Chapter 1. The pitter-patter of rain came from outside the house. Vivian carefully placed the stool in front of the stove, then bent down and grabbed 2 handfuls of brown rice from the rice bag beside her. There was not much food left in the bag. Her brother had stolen a silver ornament from the dock last month in exchange for this bag of brown rice. Even though she had carefully calculated many times in the past half a month, the decreasing amount of food still made her feel a little panicked. There was no food left. At most, they would starve in a few more days. Vivian looked at the small bed in the dilapidated house with red eyes. On the bed that was covered with a moldy smell, she could see an unconscious young man. Her brother had not woken up yet, and the priest's sister who had been willing to help them seemed to have given up hope. After all, Bishop Phil was not willing to spend so much effort to save a thief. Vivian wiped the tears from the corner of her eyes and carefully climbed down from the stool. She was only 8 years old this year. Because she was malnourished, she looked very petite. Things like starting a fire and cooking were still very difficult for her. She held a few pieces of chopped firewood in her hands, broke some branches that she had picked up during the day, and threw them into the stove. Because of the continuous rain outside, the firewood was a little wet, and the speed at which it lit was very slow. It was accompanied by a thick, choking smoke. Vivian did not care about the pain in her eyes. She puffed up her mouth and blew with all her might. When the firewood inside was lit, she gently rubbed her eyes. "Brother, you must wake up. Vivian misses you so much. Don't leave me." Translucent tears rolled down Vivian's cheeks as she sat beside the stove and sobbed softly. After a while, she wiped her face with her little hands, and 2 white streaks appeared on her blackened face. There was some salt in the house, but they had finished it last week. She wanted to learn from her brother and steal some, but she was almost caught by the fat shop owner. The owner picked up a broom and hit her on the back. Even now, her back was still bruised, and the slightest touch would make her feel a burning pain. Woof woof. An old black and yellow dog walked over. Even though it was old and clumsy, one could still tell that it used to be an excellent hunting dog. Vivian stretched out her small hand, and the old dog silently walked to her side. It raised its head to look at the stove and let out a low whimper. Beef. Vivian hugged the old dog in her arms as if she saw the desire in its eyes. She sobbed softly and reached out to gently stroke its back, murmuring, "There's not much food left. You have to leave it for Big Brother. Vivian is also very hungry. Wait for the rain to stop and look for food outside." "Sorry. Is Vivian useless? She can't steal anything and she can't save her brother. She's always crying." The old dog with cloudy eyes seemed to understand her words. It silently retracted its gaze and stuck out its tongue to lick her palm. Then it laid down at her feet and closed its eyes to sleep. The sound of footsteps came from outside the house. It seemed that the person stopped at the door and spoke faintly. The old black and yellow dog suddenly opened its eyes. In an instant, it was as fierce as a hungry wolf. It let out a fierce whimper and barked loudly toward the outside. "Damn it. Sooner or later I'll kill this old dog and make soup." A man's exasperated voice came from outside. Then the footsteps gradually faded away. Vivian's frightened face calmed down a little. She stretched out her small hand to touch the old dog's head and said softly, "Heath. If he dares to come in, bite him. Big Brother is unconscious now. Only you can protect me." The old dog gently arched in her arms. Although it looked old and clumsy, it still had a trace of fierceness. It was a Goroth hunting dog. In its prime it could even kill leopards. According to the folklore of the Agate River area, it was the offspring of the 3-headed hellhound. Unfortunately, it was very old. The smell of porridge came from the stove. The old dog's nose twitched and then it lay back down. Vivian's stomach growled, but she still carefully climbed onto the stool and scooped the porridge into a bowl that was missing a corner. She gently blew on it, and then fed the porridge to the young man on the bed with a wooden spoon bit by bit. She was really too small and didn't have much strength. She couldn't help her brother up, so she could only feed him slowly. "Big Brother. Hurry up and eat. You'll get better after you finish eating. Everything will get better." As the little girl spoke, her tears fell again. She reached out to wipe them away, put down the bowl, and climbed out of bed to close the door. This was the slum of Amber City. It was a place full of thieves, robbers, and human traffickers. It was difficult for a little girl like her to survive here. If she was not careful enough and had Heath by her side to protect her, she would have been kidnapped in broad daylight. All they needed to do was cover her mouth and nose with a wet towel soaked in knockout powder, and she would soon lose consciousness. Then she would be put into a sack and sold to the human traffickers. Many little girls in the slums had gone missing like this. Sometimes even beautiful women would be kidnapped. Vivian fed him little by little until the man on the bed finished half of the bowl. Then she hurriedly drank a few mouthfuls, washed her little hands and cheeks with water, and curled up her petite body into the musty quilt. As she touched the wound on her back, the little girl could not help but sob in pain. Then she hugged the young man's arm with both hands and said to the old dog at the door, "If anyone comes, bark. I know what they're thinking. They want to sell me to that woman, Sophia, because my brother is unconscious. That way they can get a sum of money." Having grown up in the slum, she knew far more than other children her age. Sophia was the biggest human trafficker in the slum. She would select beautiful little girls, train them into prostitutes, and send them to the big brothels in Amber City. It was impossible for an 8-year-old girl to survive in the slums. Vivian's eyes showed a trace of determination. She leaned over and gently kissed the forehead of the comatose young man on the bed. She said in a low voice, "Even if I'm going to be sold, I'll do it myself. Then I'll use the money to hire a real priest. Maybe he can save Big Brother." She knew what kind of fate she would face. Sophia would raise her for a few years and then teach her how to serve men. If she was beautiful enough, she would be sent to some of the city's nobles. Otherwise, she would only be sent to those despicable brothels. But for Big Brother, she was willing to do anything because he was her only family member. Sounds of fighting came from outside the house. Vivian could not help but shrink under the blanket. The old dog at the door also had a fierce look in its eyes. It was the slum's Colin and Sawi fighting for territory. Ever since Big Brother was injured by a scary wizard, many thieves in the slum died. The original leaders were all killed on the streets, and the remaining people fought for territory many times. None of the guards came to this place because it was a forgotten corner of Amber City. They were fighting for territory and they were also fighting for the children in the slum. No matter which gang it was, they needed to train their children to steal. Back then, Big Brother became a thief in order to support her. Vivian's memories of her parents were very vague. She only knew that her mother had a husband who was said to be an excellent thief. Unfortunately, he accepted a mission and died in a wizard's tower. It was from then on. Wizards became the scariest existence in her young heart. That man was Big Brother's biological father. Although she was not born at that time, she heard Big Brother mention it. Later on, her mother took Big Brother through a period of wandering. Because of the circumstances, she even worked as a waitress in a tavern, which was actually a part-time prostitute. Vivian knew that. She knew more than her peers. This kind of life lasted until her mother met a mysterious adventurer. Soon she became pregnant again. That adventurer did not marry her. Instead, he raised her as a prostitute. That man was Vivian's biological father. It was said that he was also a powerful professional. Heath was his pet. Later on, he mysteriously went missing. Only the old dog stayed by their side. Her mother lost 2 men in a row and began to lose her mind. She even suffered from soullessness. In the end, she died. At that time, she was only 3 years old. Big Brother was 12 years old. The 2 young children lost their parents and soon wandered the streets. At that time, the elder brother often fought with others for some meager food. Later on, Big Brother joined a gang and became a qualified thief. At that time, their lives gradually became stable, and they also had a place to stay in the chaotic slum. Shrill screams could be heard. Vivian was so scared that her whole body trembled, and she hid in the young man's arms. The old dog at the door also suddenly stood up, and looked at the alley in the distance with a fierce gaze. Someone died there. It was normal for people to die in the slum. Even the priests of the Dawnlight Temple did not care about the lives of people in the slum. The people nearby slammed the door. Someone even picked up the bolt and locked the door tightly. Vivian also got up and struggled to pick up one of the bolts. Based on her many years of living in the slum, if someone died, the problem would quickly become worse. The fighting would definitely become worse and it might affect the people nearby. Fear. The fear in her heart made the little girl hug the old dog tightly and bring it to the foot of the bed. Heath. She looked outside in horror. She could see some figures in the rain. They were holding weapons and fighting each other. Blood flowed all over the alley and was washed away by the rain. She could vaguely smell the scent of blood. Vivian bent down and patted the old dog's head. Her young body trembled in fear and she whispered, "You will protect me, right?" The old dog suddenly barked. The little girl was startled, but she soon realized that Heath was not barking at the outside. Instead, it was barking at the young man on the bed. Big Brother? Vivian turned around in surprise and found that the young man on the bed had opened his eyes and his lips were moving slightly. The pressure and fear that she had been feeling all this time suddenly exploded. The little figure threw herself into his arms, and large drops of sparkling and translucent tears slid down her tender cheeks. Chapter 2. Soren slowly opened his eyes. It had been half a month. Every time he tried to open his eyes, a dense stream of data would appear in his mind. Countless zeros and ones would flash through his mind, and he would feel a pain as if his brain was about to explode. His consciousness could barely sense his body. It was as if his body was filled with electricity, and the electrostatic field in his body was messed up. Although he could hear and feel everything outside, he couldn't do anything. He couldn't even move his fingers. No. I have to wake up. I have to wake up. Although Soren didn't know why he was reborn in the mysterious world, he knew that the little girl outside was in danger. The little girl who had been taking care of him was in danger. Her name was Vivian and she was 8 years old. She had beautiful light blonde hair, and 2 small dimples appeared when she smiled. She was Soren's half-sister. She was also the target of many human traffickers in the slums. They were sure that this little girl would become a great beauty in the future, and they could sell her for a good price if they took care of her for a while. She was a little girl without parents, and her only brother was still unconscious. No one knew if he was dead or alive. There was no better target than this. This was a sinful world. Soren had heard of people trying to break in more than once in the past half a month. If they weren't afraid of that old dog called Heath, Vivian would have fallen into their hands a long time ago. No. I have to wake up. Soren roared in his mind again and again. Even his memories of his previous life were becoming blurry. His memories of the other Soren were also fading away. The only thing in his mind was to wake up and protect the poor little girl. She was already in danger. There was no way a beautiful 8-year-old girl could survive in the slums. He could sense that 2 criminals were already discussing how to poison the old dog called Heath, and then sell Vivian to a woman called Sophia. Everything was about to happen. If he couldn't wake up, the little girl would face a tragic fate. Darkness. Endless darkness. Soren's mind was still filled with countless zeros and ones. Tiny electric currents were jumping around in his body. He could vaguely remember some of the things that happened in his previous life, and then some other vague memories were mixed in. That was a very painful thing. In this soul-tearing pain, he gradually remembered the accident in the health pod. At that time, his consciousness had already entered the virtual space, and then he remembered another scene. It was a wizard covered in a black cloak. He pointed at himself and countless lightning flashed, as if his soul was also shattered by lightning. Amidst the haze, a young man with black eyes, flaxen hair, and a youthful appearance appeared. He stretched out his hand and solemnly said, "Protect her. Don't let her get hurt." Soren's consciousness blurred again as if he was in a dream. Many things happened in the dream, but they were all memories of another person. He had completely disappeared. Only his name was left behind, because Soren felt that he shouldn't leave his name behind. After all, Soren felt that it was because he gave up on himself that he could wake up from his slumber. His name was Soren. That was why he was also called Soren. It didn't matter what he was called before. The most important thing for him now was to wake up and protect the little girl called Vivian before those villains made their move. Countless electric currents were still in his body. However, the endless zeros and ones in his mind seemed to have gradually stopped. He vaguely felt that his soul had been enriched. It was as if there was an additional spiritual force that suppressed the rampaging electric current and the zeros in his body. Then, a muffled sound exploded in his mind like a clap of thunder. All of a sudden, Soren opened his eyes, and a familiar scene appeared in front of him. Name: Soren. Race: half-elf. Attributes: Strength 12, Dexterity 19 plus 1, Vitality 15, Intelligence 18 plus 1, Wisdom 15, Charm 16. Alignment: Lawful Evil. Profession: Level 5 Commoner / Level 1 Bandit. Health points: 12 Experience points: 150 Unallocated, Skill points: None. Attribute points: None. Status: Weakened. Soul Resurrection. Profession skills: Sneak 20, Steal 35, Pick Lock 45, Snare 15. Legendary skills: Omnipotent Hands, Seal, Soul Weakening. Personal abilities: Nimble Left Hand, Eidetic Memory. This is... Soren's consciousness gradually woke up. Looking at the scene in front of him, he suddenly remembered that before the incident in the health pod, he was in a virtual game. No wonder there were so many zeros and ones in his mind for the past half a month. It turned out that when the health pod incident happened, the data in the game was also transmitted to his consciousness. During this time, when he opened his eyes, he saw a dense stream of data. It seemed that it was only now that the data was completely integrated into his brain. He was momentarily absent-minded. Soon, Soren pulled himself together and tried to focus. He thought to himself, could it be that the data is really integrated into my brain? Doesn't that mean my brain has become similar to a biological brain? I wonder if it's possible. Assign 150 EXP to the commoner profession. A warm current appeared. Soren was surprised to find that he could actually feel the existence of his limbs. The electric current in his body was also gradually disappearing, and a surge of vitality was circulating in his body. Commoner profession level increased to 10. Basic profession level increased to max level. Obtain 25 skill points. A row of familiar words appeared. Soren's heart was filled with joy. Everything in front of him was exactly the same as the virtual game he had entered before. Before the incident, he was in the virtual world, and his consciousness was transmitted to a game called Clash of the Titans. This was a very popular game at the time. When other virtual games were still stuck at 75% realism, this game had already announced that it had achieved a breakthrough in technology and achieved 100% realism. This caused a huge reaction in the Earth Federation. When it first started, it attracted countless people. Soren was also attracted to it at that time. He even praised the game pod for its magical style. There was even a magic circle at the bottom of the pod. In the era before his reincarnation, virtual worlds were a very important field. This was because the interstellar era required a large number of talents to master complex knowledge. All of this required a strong memory and calculation ability. At the beginning, virtual worlds were used to stimulate the right brain region with electric currents to strengthen calculation and memory. This increased the development of the human right brain by 3% to 10%. It could be said that this was a kind of human brain research. When necessary, smart chips would be implanted. This progress was relatively slow and required a large amount of resources. In the end, the cheaper virtual gaming industry was created, and it became a very important core industry. Games are conscious simulated activities that all young children, animals and people need to live and jump. Plato. Before systematic learning, games were a very important means of simulation. The boring emotions produced by normal learning would mostly stimulate the left brain. This kind of knowledge would be easily forgotten. Therefore, most of the exam-oriented knowledge would be forgotten. The right brain, on the other hand, required a more active emotional energy. It also required a large amount of high-speed memory, and a photographic memory that was 1,000,000 times better than the left brain. The potential difference between the two was more than 100,000 times. Therefore, in the interstellar era, brain development was a very important field. Many jobs required one to have a brain development of 12% and above. As long as one could reach this requirement, they would be able to grasp the relevant professional knowledge in a very short time. The use of large amounts of machinery increased the demand for high-end talents. The replacement of low-level labor by machines also caused most people to become idle. Therefore, virtual games, a cheap and important field that could alleviate social conflicts, became unprecedentedly prosperous. Research showed. In all kinds of extremely harsh and complex environments simulated by virtual worlds, the effect of the right brain could be increased by more than 300%. This had an unimaginable effect on developing the potential of the right brain region. Although in this situation there would be a hidden psychological hint that everything is not real, the stimulation of the right brain region was still several times higher than in a normal learning environment. Therefore, the more realistic the virtual game, the more obvious the stimulation of the brain region. The increased development would also be higher. Although this higher premise was to increase from 1% to about 3%, the progress was not very obvious. However, it was already considered a major breakthrough. After all, the stimulation in the real world was only 1.5% at most. Therefore, before they had the qualifications to work, many people had to go through a process that took a lot of time to enter the virtual world. This process was relatively long. Because of the mysterious field of the brain, everything was full of unknowns. Before the accident, Soren was controlling his legendary thief character to sneak into the Shadow Palace to steal the epic item that could allow him to obtain the demigod's divinity. Because at that time he had already realized the limitations of the thief class. If he did not have the demigod's divinity, he would not have any advantage in the future war of the gods. At that time he had already advanced to level 20, and the special skill he chose for his legendary class was Omnipotent Hands. Omnipotent Hands, legendary skill. Legendary thieves have incomparably nimble hands. When performing any class-related test, an additional +5 test bonus will be obtained. At the same time, when using any weapon in battle, the thief will automatically master the weapon's specialty. In theory, omnipotent hands can also use any item. Whether it is the treasures of the gods or some clearly defined weapons and equipment, omnipotent hands can easily use them. Omnipotent hands. The special skill of the legendary thief class, and also a shameless skill that many people in the game were jealous of. If it were not for the fact that the thief's combat strength was not enough after entering the legendary realm, perhaps there would have been people who were dissatisfied with this skill. After all, after mastering omnipotent hands, the thief could use most of the weapons and equipment. Not to mention the wizard's high-grade arcane scrolls, legendary thieves could even flexibly use many divine weapons with strict requirements. Moreover, there were almost no side effects. The War of the Gods. This virtual reality game had extremely strict requirements for class advancement. Commoners could not obtain any attribute points by leveling up their classes, and even their basic health points could not be increased. The only thing that could be obtained was 25 skill points. Only when leveling up their class advancement would they be able to obtain one attribute point every 2 levels. Gradually he regained his senses. When Soren opened his eyes again, it was already the morning of the next day. Vivian's petite body was lying on the bed, asleep. Since he opened his eyes yesterday, the little girl was so excited that she did not sleep at all. She laid beside him and took care of him until the wee hours of the morning before falling asleep in a daze. Ugh! A tingling pain came from his body. When Soren tried to lift a finger, he immediately felt as if his whole body was being electrocuted. The electric current in his body was still there, and there were still some streams of data floating in his brain. This made Soren even more suspicious that his brain had been accidentally modified into a biological brain. Because the scientific research in the field of science had already proven that the human brain could be used as the core component of a superintelligent brain, there were once top scientists who were willing to contribute their brains to the scientific research after their death. The smart chip was also developed on this basis. Streaks of electric current jumped around in his body. However, as the pain disappeared, he gradually regained control of his body and sat up shakily. Brother. Vivian opened her eyes in a daze, and then happily hugged his arm and sobbed, Hoo. You're finally okay? Vivian was so worried. So many bad guys. They wanted to kidnap Vivian and sell her. Thank goodness Heath was there. Otherwise, Vivian would have been taken away by them. Heath? Vivian opened her eyes and turned to look at the door. Suddenly her whole body froze. She let go of Soren's arm and rushed to the door. She hugged the old dog's body and said in horror, Heath, what happened to you? Don't scare me. Don't scare Vivian. Wake up. Can you bark? I'm begging you, can you please bark? Drops of tears fell. Vivian sat in the corner and hugged the black and yellow dog's body. She silently cried. The old dog's body was already cold. It lay quietly in front of the door. It was sleeping peacefully. Its name was Heath and it was a Goroth hound. When it was in its prime it could fight with cheetahs, but it was very old now. Ever since Soren fell into a coma, it had been following this little girl named Vivian closely. It was protecting her. It had not had a good rest for half a month because it was the only one who could protect Vivian from harm. It was very tired and very hungry. Because there was not much food left, Vivian had been starving. It could only find time to catch some mice that it used to disdain. Unfortunately, it was too old. Most of the time it was still hungry. It was only because of its instinct to protect its master that it could hold on for so long. Now, Soren had finally woken up. Its mission was completed. It was really old. Hence, it lay in front of the door and slept peacefully. It would never wake up again. Chapter 3. After the rain, the road was muddy. There were always muddy roads in the slums, and mud and dirt would splash up when one stepped on them. Occasionally, there would be feces and garbage in the corners of the alleys that would be washed out by the rain. There was always a foul smell in the air. Many people with numb expressions could be seen busying themselves in the densely packed shacks. They needed to repair their houses before rushing to the docks to find a job as coolies. Whenever there was a storm, there would always be leaks in the houses. Sometimes, there would even be a tragedy of a house collapsing. Soren carried the old dog's cold corpse as he walked along the muddy and stinky road. Vivian held his hand with a sad expression and silently followed behind him. Heath was dead. The old dog that had been by her side since she was born had finally reached the end of its life. They were going to bury it just like how they would bury a human. It had the right to do so. Soren. That's Soren. You woke up. This is going to be interesting. The people in the slums couldn't help but whisper to each other. There was a hint of respect in their eyes because the young man in front of them was a powerful thief. He could easily defeat 3 to 5 adult men. It was said that he once used a dagger to nail a fly flying around. There were 2 ruffians near this street called Ballas and Kanobo. They had their eyes on Vivian ever since Soren fell unconscious. It was even said that they had taken part of Sophia's deposit. They had been warned not to meddle in other people's business. The slums were a land of evil. No one was willing to stand up for this poor little girl. They were afraid of the ruffians and had no ability to fight against them. "Brother. Where are we going?" Vivian was wearing a tattered dress. It was a cheap dress sewn from linen. Both the workmanship and the fabric were of inferior quality. Only the people in the slums would wear it. Although Soren was once an excellent thief, there was an even better thief above him. Most of the things he stole had to be offered to the thief, and what was left was only enough to maintain their basic survival. This was the law of survival for the marginalized. No matter how excellent a new thief was, there was no way they could challenge this law. To the cemetery. Heath should be buried there. Soren stared at the familiar yet strange scenery in front of him. He couldn't help but overlap some of the images in his memory. Amber City gave him a sense of familiarity because he had heard of this name in the game before. However, at that time the epic storyline had already begun. A terrifying power had erupted in the chaotic space-time, causing the gods to temporarily lose their divine power and be forced to descend into the world as saints. That was a period of extreme chaos. Every once in a while, gods would return to the kingdom, and there would also be mortals who succeeded in slaying gods. Players were only a part of it, and it could even be said that they were an inconspicuous part of it. This was because in Clash of the Titans, players only had 3 lives. Every time he died and revived, his physique would permanently decrease by 3 points. In the end, he would have no choice but to send his soul back to the underworld to be reincarnated. During that period of time, many powerful players rose to prominence, but they quickly fell. The stage belonged to everyone. It wasn't until the end of the time of turmoil that the gods were able to return to the pantheon, that this epic calamity finally ended. 1/3 of the gods in the pantheon had fallen. Even powerful gods like the goddess of magic, the master of order, the mistress of night, the lord of shadows, and the dreadlord had fallen in this chaotic calamity. Then an even more magnificent plot began. The thrones of the gods fell from the heavens, and the kingdoms of countless gods collapsed and fell into the mortal world, turning into special realms. These realms were the gods' kingdoms. The players had gone through a long period of hardship, and only a small number of people who had survived were qualified to explore these realms. As for the other masters who had fallen, they had to start all over again. At the very least, they had to raise their profession level to advanced before they were qualified to explore even the weakest god of kobolds, Groka's kingdom's treasury. Many chaotic memories surfaced. Some of the familiar scenes in front of him told Soren that this world would become a time of turmoil in the future. The saints in the form of the gods tore apart the earth, and more than 12 continental plates of the lower realms were completely changed. 3 of the lower realms were completely reduced to seas of fire, ice, and death. The projections of hell's devils were everywhere, and they bewitched people's hearts and set off waves of slaughter. Even the players were not lacking in existences that were bewitched by them. The abyssal demons tore apart the sky and descended in an endless sea of blood. On the first day of the abyssal demons' awakening, 12 cities with more than 100,000 people were slaughtered. That was what the players called the Twilight Period. It was the twilight of the gods, their twilight, and everyone's twilight. In this chaos that affected the entire universe, everyone had died at least once. Even Soren had completely fallen, and his soul had to be reincarnated in the underworld. No one would be able to escape this calamity. Even the natural-born hero-class players could be obliterated as easily as an ant being crushed to death. This was the age of the saints. It was also the age of the gods. It was also the last celebration of the gods in the heavens. When the calamity ended, the age of the mortals was about to begin. The endless kingdoms of the gods were waiting for them to explore, and the treasures of the gods had everything they wanted. Whether it was great power, endless wealth, or the eternal life that everyone longed for. The graveyard was not in the slums. There were only mass graves in the slums. Every once in a while, corpses would be thrown there. Then, destitute scavengers would strip the corpses clean and wait for wild dogs to appear in the middle of the night. There were also corpses that would disappear into thin air, taken away by evil spellcasters. As for what would become of them in the end, no one wanted to know. Heath could not be buried in the mass graves. This was because Soren had seen the greed in the eyes of many people. In their eyes, What they saw was a pile of delicious dog meat. He believed that if he buried Heath there, someone would dig it up that night, peel it, and cut it into pieces to make a big pot of dog meat. This was the slums. Most of the people living here were on the verge of starvation. They wanted to eat meat. If it wasn't for the fact that eating human meat would bring them to the depths of hell, some of the starving homeless people would have done something outrageous. Soren still remembered when he first entered the game. At that time, he and the others could not imagine that the environment in the game could be so harsh and difficult. There was no dazzling equipment, no beautiful scenery, and no easy battles to vent one's anger. There was only a moment of life and death battle. There was only a filthy and messy slum filled with trash and feces, as well as an omnipresent evil and darkness. In order to obtain a delicious meal or a blank-grade weapon, many people were willing to risk losing their heads. Many people who had just entered the game were deeply affected by the dark, evil, and depraved nature of the game. There were even many paladins among the players. They vowed to change this evil and depraved game world. But in the end, they were the ones who were changed because they did not have the ability to challenge the rules of the world. The world would not be easily changed by you. Every player who entered Clash of the Titans had to go through a period of difficult choices. This was because in this unimaginable dark period of modern civilization, they would experience many things that they did not even dare to imagine. It could be evil and cruel, or it could be holy and great. In this virtual world, everyone had to choose their own path whether they were willing or not. And because of this, for many people, Clash of the Titans was like another country in their lives. Graveyard. This was a quiet and peaceful place. Because the shrine of the daughter of Hades was built here, it was the resting place of the dead. There were priests and shrine guards here to ensure that the souls that were resting in peace would not be disturbed. However, not everyone had the right to enter this place because they had to pay a certain price. The goddess of wealth once said that everything in the world could be measured with money. This was an evil era filled with materialistic desires. Soren stood silently in front of the shrine with Heath's corpse in his arms. When an old priest appeared in front of him, he and Vivian slowly lowered their heads to show their respect. At first, he doubted that he was still in the game world. However, when he saw living people with their own consciousness, he knew that he was in a real world. Moreover, from what Vivian said, Soren knew that they did not know what attributes were. Although he did not know why. Soren suddenly remembered that there was a magic circle under the gaming pod that looked like a decoration. Because it looked a little creepy, many people removed it after buying it. Soren was brave enough to keep it. However, it seemed that the game company had listened to the players' opinions and did not add this strange decoration after the first batch of gaming pods. Are you sure you want to let it enter the graveyard? The old priest had seen many nobles who wanted to send their pets to rest in the graveyard, but he had never seen a poor person like Soren. The clothes they were wearing and the mud on their feet were proof that they were poor people of the lowest class. Soren bowed slightly and said, "Yes. This is for its burial. It's an offering to the shrine." He took out a silver dural and respectfully handed it to the priest. As a natural thief, the effort he put in along the way was enough for him to get his first income. As long as he was not discovered. It was a shiny silver dural, a currency made by the believers of the goddess of wealth. Could be used even in hell. The old priest looked at him deeply and pointed at the box beside him. "Maybe it's a loyal hound. That's why it's worth it. Child, come with me. It'll be given a place to rest in peace." Soren put the silver dural into the box at the entrance of the shrine and carried Heath's body into the graveyard. It was a small and inconspicuous corner. When the two dug a hole in the graveyard and buried Heath, Vivian, who had been in a daze, started crying again. The little girl squatted in front of the inconspicuous grave and whispered a few words. Then, she stood up with a determined expression and held one of Soren's fingers. Heath was just an inconspicuous old dog. It did not have the right to have a tombstone, so it only had a small grave. In the most remote corner of the graveyard. Chapter 4. When Soren brought Vivian back to the slums, Soren was stunned. He spent 3 copper dirhams to buy a piece of black bread that was as thick as an arm. It was the kind of black bread that could be used as a weapon to attack stupid burglars who broke into houses and had 1d3 lethality. The poor of the lower class would grind the unshelled rye directly into powder. Their crude technique would result in wood shavings and some strange things inside. After cooling, it would become as hard as a wooden club. Only by cutting it open with a knife and soaking it in water for a while could it be barely swallowed. Many people who entered this world took risks because they could not stand the food. Many players joined the evil faction at the beginning of the game. Soren was the same. That was why he became a rogue. Perhaps it was because he was now in a more realistic world, or maybe it was because he had a little girl by his side, but Soren was far more patient than before. He carefully cut open the black bread, soaked it in hot water, and handed it to Vivian in front of him. He took a bite himself, enduring the wood-like texture, and silently swallowed it. It was not that he did not have a way to earn money. It was because he knew what would happen if he was caught. After all, this was not a game. He was no longer a player. In this strange yet familiar world, he had to be responsible for his own actions, especially for the little girl beside him, Vivian. There were many powerful professions in Amber City, and the guards guarding the city were all level 10 militia or level 3 warriors. Unless he increased his steel skill to 75 points, there was still a chance that he would be discovered. Thieves who were caught stealing would be thrown into prison, and they might even have an arm broken. If the target of the theft was a noble. Although there was no salt and it was hard to swallow, Vivian still ate happily. She was a little girl who was easily satisfied. She was really hungry. As long as her brother was by her side, everything would be fine. The pressure of the past 2 weeks had exhausted the little girl. She just wanted to be by her brother's side and be an inconspicuous little girl. "I'll buy you something delicious tomorrow." Soren gently stroked Vivian's little head, leaned over and kissed her forehead. He said seriously, "Everything will be fine." "Yes." Vivian nodded gently. If there was anyone in this world who could gain her unreserved trust, it would be her brother. Ever since she was 3 years old, it was this young man who had shielded her from the wind and rain. He had silently held on until now. Vivian still remembered when she was very, very young. At that time, her brother was always injured. She didn't know how to do anything but cry uselessly. Her bruised and swollen brother would always comfort her, saying that everything would be fine. Later, they no longer had to live on the streets and finally had a small home in the chaotic slums. Everything will be fine. The little girl, who had just turned 8 this year, was ignorant of many things. However, she knew that as long as her brother was around, he would always protect her. "This is great." Soren looked at Vivian, who was sleeping soundly on the bed, and a faint smile appeared on his face. She was really exhausted. It was really hard for an 8-year-old girl to survive in such a chaotic slum for half a month. She probably hadn't had a good night's sleep in such a long time. Soren opened a hidden compartment under the wooden plank and took out a dagger that glinted with a cold light. His lips curled into a sneer. It was time to send those bastards who dared to have designs on Vivian to hell. Night fell quietly. It was dark in the slums and only a few places were still lit. It was the Stove Tavern, one of the few luxuries in the slums. Here one could buy a large cup of low-quality ale with 1 copper dural. Although it tasted fainter, it was still a rare indulgence for many of the lower class. There was a row of low sheds next to the tavern. For another 5 copper dirals one could find a cheap brothel and have some fun. There was no need to expect her to be very good-looking. At most, she was a female creature with breasts and buttocks. Outside the Stove Tavern was a dark alley. Not many people dared to walk around at night because this was an area where people on the fringe of society frequented. The entire slum was filled with dark alleys like this. Apart from a small number of people, most people rarely went out at night. The Furnace Tavern was in an uproar. There were laborers working at the docks, gang members with gloomy expressions, and people from all walks of life. They were mostly talking about the recent conflict between the 2 gangs. There were also some who gloated that someone dared to have designs on Vivian. Now that Soren had woken up, someone was going to be in trouble. After he finished speaking, the scar-faced man looked at the corner of the tavern. There were 2 men sitting there. They were Barris and Kanobo, who wanted to sell Vivian to Sophia. One of them was limping. He was bitten by a ferocious old dog when they tried to force their way through. "Let's go." Barris looked at the others in the tavern and said, "Let's go back first." There's always a way to deal with Soren. Kanobo finished the low-quality ale in his cup. He was a stingy person and didn't want to waste anything. The 2 of them had already received Sophia's deposit a few days ago. If they couldn't send Vivian over, someone would come to talk to them soon. Now, it was impossible to stop even if he wanted to. Moreover, Soren had always treated his sister as more important than his own life. If the 2 of them dared to have designs on her, Soren would definitely not let them off. A cold wind blew in. The people in the tavern cursed and turned around to see that Barris and Kanobo had already left. The moon in the sky was gray. The 2 of them couldn't help but shiver when they walked out of the tavern. Perhaps it was because they had drunk a lot. Barris found an alley and hid in it. He was about to pee in the corner. This was the slum. Not to mention pee, even defecation was done in the corners of alleys. Barris unbuckled his belt and peed. He could faintly hear squeaking sounds coming from the hut beside the Furnace Tavern. He couldn't help but curse in a low voice. He spoke in the dialect of the Chibe region. Perhaps it was because he thought of Soren waking up, but his expression didn't look good. All of a sudden, he felt goosebumps all over his body. He could faintly see a shadow moving in the dark corner of the alley. He didn't have time to call back the pee and reached for his waist. There was a dagger there. But it was too late. Soren's figure appeared out of thin air in an instant. His figure appeared in the hazy shadows. He didn't know how long he had been waiting here. A gleaming dagger pierced into his back, following which a hand covered Balas's mouth, stopping him from screaming before his death. But Soren expressionlessly put away the dagger and wiped the blood off the corpse. A row of data appeared in front of his eyes. Shadow hiding successful. Backstab activated. Successfully activated Backstab X2, dealing 12 damage to target. Target killed. Extracting soul energy from target, received 30 slaughter EXP. Even though he was only a level 1 rogue, he could still deal double the damage with Backstab. An ordinary pauper only had around 5 HP. With Soren's 15 vitality, he only had 12 HP after becoming a level 1 rogue. A mere thug from the slum was enough for him to kill in one hit. Unless his opponent was someone with a different class, Soren could easily assassinate his target. The noise from the alley woke Kenobo up. He couldn't help but shiver. He immediately shouted towards the alley, "Barris?" There was no response. After hesitating for a moment, he cautiously moved closer to the alley, wanting to see what Barris was doing. If there was something wrong, he would immediately turn around and run. A figure bent over and kicked off the wall, then shot out from the alley. With 19 dexterity, Soren could jump onto the roof of the first floor without any external help. His silhouette pounced out like a cheetah, instantly grabbing Kenobo by the neck, forcing him to swallow his cries. The force of the impact caused him to fall to the ground, and then a cold glint flashed past. The dagger slit open Kenobo's throat, and then pierced through his heart from the front. Soren held his target tightly until the corpse stopped twitching. Only then did he stand up. He was covered in blood. He frowned as he looked at his body, then took out the money pouch from the corpse and put away the dagger. The two thugs didn't have much money on them, only 5 silver dirhams and 20 copper dirhams in total. There was also a pack of low-quality booze on Barris' corpse, which should be used to deal with Heath. Their strength is roughly equivalent to a level 1 adventurer. Soren looked at his palm, then slowly merged into the shadows and left in the direction he came from. This was the rogue's stealth ability. Using the power of the shadows to hide, Soren had allocated all his skill points to sneak before coming here. The 45 points of sneak allowed him to become hazy and silent in the shadows, enough to fool most ordinary people. If he could raise his stealth to 100 points, he could even hide in the shadows without leaving any traces behind. When stealth reached 150, he could achieve an effect similar to invisibility. Even if he was standing right in front of you, you wouldn't be able to detect him. When stealth reached 200, even if there were no shadows, rogues could completely disappear. The Furnace Tavern was still bustling with noise. It wasn't until a drunk man walked out that people noticed the 2 cold corpses on the side of the alley. No one cared and no one pursued the matter. This was a chaotic slum area, and people had died many times over. Tomorrow someone would come to clean up their corpses. P.S. If you like it, add it to your collection. The main character's faction is lawful evil. Chapter 5. Soren quietly returned home. Vivian was still sleeping peacefully on the bed with a faint smile on her face. However, she seemed to have dreamt of something bad as a look of horror appeared on her face. "Big brother," she murmured in her sleep. "Don't go. Don't leave me. Don't catch me. You're all bad people. Don't. Bite them. Bite them." "Oh. Heath, what's wrong? Don't scare me." Vivian's small hands waved wildly. Her eyes were still closed, but her thin arms seemed to be hugging something. Soren, who was about to change out of his blood-stained clothes, quickly walked over and gently patted the little girl's back. But he seemed to have touched something, and a look of pain appeared on Vivian's small face. Soren quickly lifted her clothes and immediately saw a purplish bruise on the little girl's back that was gradually turning black. It was a scar left behind by someone who had beaten her with a stick. The clotted blood was slowly turning black because it couldn't be dissolved. In an instant, Soren's face became extremely gloomy, and a strong murderous intent burst out from his eyes. He gently caressed Vivian's cheeks and carefully put down the clothes. He murmured, "Silly girl. Why didn't you tell me you were injured?" It was such a serious injury. She was able to resist telling him all this time because she didn't want him to worry. The clotted blood on her back had already turned black, and it seemed like she had been injured for quite some time. The little girl was able to endure her injuries and take care of him for such a long time. Soren couldn't help but tear up when he thought of this. It was a warm feeling that he had never felt before. The benefits of the galactic era were so good that he didn't need parents or children to support him. Things like family were very familiar yet strange to him. But from this little girl in front of him, he could feel a warm current in his heart. He was a person who went with the flow. Everything that had happened in the past half a month had already made him deeply attached to the little girl in front of him. He didn't miss the lonely life he had in the past. "It's okay. It will be better tomorrow." Soren gently stroked Vivian's little head, comforting her as she was having a nightmare. He whispered, "I'll get you a healing potion tomorrow. This kind of injury won't be a problem. There won't be any scars left." Vivian gradually calmed down. Soren stood up and took off his clothes, revealing his lean and muscular body. He threw the blood-stained clothes onto the stove and looked at the scars on his body in silence. Come to think of it, Soren must have had a hard time in the past. It was almost impossible for a young boy to raise a 3-year-old sister through normal means. He had fought before and he had killed before. A young man who was only 18 years old had dozens of scars on his body. It was unknown how many times he had escaped death. These scars were all from street fights, and there were also whip scars from being caught stealing. Although he was just an ordinary young man, everything he had experienced was probably more vicissitudes than many professional adventurers. A weak firelight appeared. Soren changed into a clean set of clothes. Vivian was a very diligent girl. Although she was only 8 years old, she would always do something within her ability. The house was always clean and tidy, and the clothes were always neatly folded. Soren reached out and touched his cheek. He could feel the handsome outline of his face, and his ears were sharper than the average person's. Since Soren's father was a half-elf with 1/4 blood, he should also have 1/8 elven blood in him. This was also why he was more agile than ordinary people. The dexterity of the elves was almost innate. The darkness couldn't block Soren's vision. Almost all half-elves had night vision to a certain extent. They were the best assassins in the dark. His foundation is not bad. Soren stretched his wrist, and the dagger danced at his fingertips, drawing a cold light. Although he doesn't have a professional hero template, and there's no way to redistribute his attributes, his overall quality is better than most. His only weakness is his strength. An ordinary person's strength is around 10 points, and 12 points of strength is about the same as the workers at the docks. He probably didn't deliberately train, and has always been facing everything with his skills. His dexterity is very high. But if he hasn't received proper combat training, dexterity is not as useful as strength. At least his strength can defeat his opponents directly. Soren switched the dagger to his other hand, and the dagger danced so fast that it almost turned into a blur. His left hand was very agile and even stronger than his right hand. This was an innate talent. If he could train a little, he could master the ability to use 2 weapons. It was a very good combat ability. I need experience to improve my strength. Soren's figure gradually became hazy in the darkness. He whispered, "It seems like there are no quests, so there are fewer ways to gain experience. But I'm sure we can still gain experience from killing. I don't know. Can the thief profession's lockpicking and disarming skills give experience?" Killing experience. This was the highest level of experience, and it could be distributed to all professions, subclasses, and profession change templates. As for the thief profession's lockpicking and disarming skills, it was a lower level experience, and could only be distributed to increase the thief's level. The same applied to the wizard profession's experience points for copying arcane scrolls. It wasn't easy to gain EXP in Clash of the Titans. Killing monsters alone wouldn't yield much EXP. Sometimes, a legendary adventurer's target might be an adult dragon or a lich, but the EXP gained would only amount to a few tens of thousands. It was barely enough to raise one's class level or 2. When Soren became a legendary level thief, it took him several years to kill 3 dragons and 6 liches. Only 1/3 of the teams that had cooperated with him along the way had survived. The rest were forced to enter the river Styx. Omnipotent hands. Soren's eyes flashed and he said in a low voice, "I don't know when I'll be able to recover from the weakness of my resurrection. If I can regain the omnipotent hands, my strength will increase tremendously." The night was getting darker. Soren put away his dagger and placed it in a place where he could reach it at any time. He then carefully climbed into bed. Vivian's small body unconsciously squeezed into his embrace, and she mumbled in her sleep as she hugged his arm with her slender arms. The night passed. Soren was awakened by a slight movement. Vivian tilted her head and looked at him for a while, and then a sweet smile appeared on her face. She carefully climbed out of bed. Because she touched the wound on her back, her small face couldn't help but reveal a trace of pain. Then she bent over to where her worn-out cloth shoes, picked up the broom and began to sweep the room, wiping the simple and crude furniture. When she saw the bloodstains on the floor, her face showed a trace of fear. She quickly ran over to Soren and lifted the blanket. After making sure that Soren was not injured, she patted her chest and wiped the blood off with a cloth. As long as Soren was not injured and bleeding, she did not care about anything else. When she was very young, Soren once fought with a group of older children over a silver dural that he picked up. Solon was surrounded and kicked by a group of older children. She hid in a corner and cried. She was too young to have any strength. In the end, she mustered up all her courage and picked up a stone and threw it at the leader of the group. The angry older child slapped her in the face. Her face immediately swelled up and one of her baby teeth was knocked out. She still remembered the situation even though she was very young at the time. Sauron, who had been holding his head and silently taking the beating, suddenly pounced on the older child like a wild beast and bit his ear. Sauron looked at her and seemed to have lost his mind after she fell to the ground. Sauron, who was originally holding his head and silently taking a beating, suddenly pounced on the older child like a wild beast and bit his ear. The bloody ear was bitten off. Soren's eyes were bloodshot. He picked up a stone and smashed it on the younger child's head until it bled. The frightened Vivian rushed over and held him back. Only then did the older child not die on the spot, although he still died in the end. When the body was found, it was already many days later. It floated in the muddy ditch outside the slums, and its original appearance could no longer be recognized. It was not easy for them to live. They had nothing but each other. Vivian did not care whether Soren was a thief, whether he had committed a crime, or whether he had killed someone. She was willing to bear half of all the sins that Soren had committed. Vivian carefully cleaned the room. When she saw the empty rice bag, a trace of worry appeared on her face. She then said to herself, "Brother has woken up. Soon it will be full of rice." She believed in Soren. It was an unconditional trust. She had been hungry before. There was even a period of time when she was often hungry. But her brother had never let her down. Even when she ate the food that was stained with her brother's blood, she still felt very uncomfortable. But she still believed that as long as her brother was here, everything would be fine. Yes, everything would be fine. Thus, she quickly let go of this little worry. She softly hummed a tuneless ballad and cleaned everything in the room. Soren slowly got up. He put on the old clothes that had been washed gray. He reached out his hand and lovingly patted Vivian's head. He whispered, "Be a good girl and stay at home today. In 2 days we will move to the city." Vivian gently nodded. Her face showed a trace of joy. She did not think about how difficult it would be to move from the slums to the city. It would require a lot of money and the identity of a free person. She believed in Soren. Because Soren could always do what he said. Even if he couldn't do it, it was not Soren's fault. It was because there were too many bad people in this world. The first rays of the morning sun shone on this inconspicuous old hut. Soren used a dagger to slice the black bread that was as hard as a stick after last night into pieces of bread of different sizes. Vivian tiptoed on the stool to take the cooked rice porridge. Because she was too weak, her body was a little shaky. Soren smiled and supported her. He reached out to take the old pot. The little girl raised her head. Her white face smiled sweetly at him under the sunlight, revealing 2 shallow dimples. Everything was so beautiful. Chapter 6. It was a simple yet heartwarming breakfast. When Soren was about to leave, Vivian immediately stood up and tidied his sleeves with her small hands. Then she stood on the stool and tipped her toes to fix his collar. They did not say much since they already had a tacit understanding. Soren gently patted her little head and walked out of the low shed. Brother. When Soren's figure left, Vivian shrunk her body and locked the door tightly. Her brother used to leave like this too, but she was not afraid at all because she had Heath by her side. Even if bad guys broke in, the old dog would protect her. Robberies had happened many times in the slums. Now that Heath had left forever, she was the only one left in the room. She could not help but feel a little scared. In the end, After all, she was only an 8-year-old girl. She had never felt safe. She was afraid of the dark, loneliness, and being alone. However, she could not tell Soren. Soren also had something important to do. He needed money and there was not much food left in the house. She did not want to be a burden to her brother. Even if there was not much she could do, the little girl still felt that she should not make Soren worry. Vivian. The little girl held the broom tightly in her hand and whispered, "You have to learn to be strong. You have to learn to take care of yourself. Brother has woken up, and no one dares to disturb him. They're all afraid of brother." The dock area. This was the most densely populated area in Amber City. The entire city's economy was supported by the Agate River. Most of the men in the slums worked here as coolies. The Agate River had an endless stream of ships transporting goods from all over the world, and it required a lot of labor to move them. This was also the place where the conflict between the gangs was the most intense. There were more than 10 gangs of various sizes that made a living here. Whether it was stealing, withholding goods, or extorting protection fees, many gangs could always find a way to make money here. Is that Soren? A tall and skinny man glanced at Soren, who was walking over from afar, and immediately whispered something to the person beside him. Then he walked over and said, "Soren, the boss wants to see you." Soren raised his head and looked at the man in front of him. He immediately remembered who he was, a guy named Garrus. He was a warrior with decent skills. He had been an adventurer for a while, but he had never expected to encounter a group of goblins and gnolls not long after leaving Amber City. Gnolls were dangerous creatures. They moved in groups and often ambushed adventurers in the middle of the night. Most of the adventurers were killed. He was lucky enough to escape, but one of his arms was severely injured. Later on, he joined a local gang and gave up on the idea of becoming a powerful adventurer and winning amazing wealth and reputation. According to the class template, he should be a level 10 commoner or level 3 warrior. Slightly weaker than the guards of Agate City. Boss. Soren looked at him and shook his head. The boss is dead. He was killed by that wizard. It was a quest that should not have been accepted. Not only did it kill Soren, but it also killed most of the core members of the gang. Wizards were not that easy to deal with. In this world, wizards who were qualified to act alone were all grade 1 and above. In terms of the class template, they were at least level 10 scholar or level 5 wizard. Not to mention a mere gang, even a regular army might not be able to defeat him. Soren knew how terrifying a grade 1 wizard could be. If not for the fact that they were too weak, they would be one of the most powerful classes in the world. The world was about to enter a period of chaos. Even those in the realm of legends could be slaughtered like chickens and dogs, let alone those in the realm of legends. He had no interest in wasting his time on a local gang. Soren. Gallies looked at him silently and said slowly, "Cole has become the new leader. It's up to you whether you want to meet him or not. Cole is not someone who is easy to talk to." Soren was an excellent thief. No gang would easily give up on such a source of wealth. It was fine when he was unconscious. After all, no one would pay attention to someone who was about to die. But now that he was awake, they naturally had to find a way to rope him in. Soren could hear the faint threat in his words. He narrowed his eyes and revealed a trace of killing intent. He was a thief. Thieves were also assassins in the shadows. They were more dangerous than anyone else. "I'll make the decision myself." Soren ignored Garrus and walked towards the docks. He still had things to do. In the past, Soren was a bit cowardly in the gang because he cared about Vivian. Every time he stole something, a large part of it would be taken away. The remaining was barely enough for the two of them to survive. The main reason was that Soren did not receive any proper combat training. Even if he had more than 18 points of dexterity, his combat ability was far inferior to that of a warrior who had received proper training. But now Soren was different. The man in front of him would not be able to last more than 3 moves against him. It was an inconspicuous warehouse. There were many goods stored in it. It was a common place in the docks. A shadow quietly approached. Soren carefully avoided the guards outside. They were just strong ordinary people. After entering the warehouse, he quickly found a box. It was a locked box. There were some valuable goods inside. He took out a piece of iron wire with a hook from his pocket. Currently, this was the only tool he had on him to pick locks. Soren carefully put his hand into the box. Then, his fingers nimbly moved. Ding. Gotcha. After a while, the lock on the box was quickly pried open. A row of data appeared. Lock picked successfully. Your rogue skills have improved. You have received 15 profession EXP. When Soren saw the data in front of him, he immediately let out a sigh of relief. It seemed that the way to gain profession EXP was still the same. In the early stages of the game, rogues were not a strong combat class. They did not have a strong physique like warriors. They also did not have special abilities like paladins. Adventuring and killing in the wild was very dangerous for rogues. Whether it was low-level kobolds or goblins, they would appear in groups. Many of them had a keen sense of smell. It was easy for them to detect low-level rogues in stealth. Therefore, in the early stages of the game, the only way for rogues to level up was to pick locks and disarm traps. This was the safest way. Before reaching level 5, rogues could gain profession EXP by picking locks. Before reaching level 10, disarming traps would still give them a lot of profession EXP. As for the later stages, only special magic locks and high-level traps would be useful. Normal locks and traps could no longer improve a rogue's skills. Soren gently opened the box. It was filled with tea bricks. He did not touch the goods. Instead, he continued with the normal boxes. Picking the same lock twice would not give profession EXP. If he wanted to gain profession EXP, he would have to meet the requirements to improve a rogue's skills. There were many locked boxes at the docks. It was enough to raise his rogue level. He opened 3 boxes in a row. Soren's footsteps suddenly stopped in front of a door. He carefully observed the ground and then took a deep breath. He gently jumped up and landed on top of an oak barrel. Then he reached out and pinched an inconspicuous silk thread. He fixed the thread and wrapped it around a nail. Then he used a dagger to cut off the other end. Then he quickly removed an alarm device. This was a simple trap. If the thread was accidentally broken, the other end of the trap would sound the alarm. At that time, quite a number of bandits had been caught and beaten to a pulp. The world of Clash of the Titans was very cruel. Those rogues who were crippled had no one to save them. They could not afford the expensive treatment either. In the end, they were completely crippled and had to die again. It was extremely difficult to go from a low-level profession to the realm of legends. Many of them fell again and again. Not only did it require strength, but luck was also very important. Soren waited quietly. He carefully observed the ground and looked for possible traps. There was one such warehouse. If there was an alarm device, then there would be more than one. There must be another trap. There might be something valuable inside. As expected, Soren quickly discovered something strange under the wooden board. He carefully pried it up with his dagger and held it firmly with his fingers. He did not dare to tremble in the slightest. There was an even more dangerous trap below. If he was triggered, throwing knives would shoot out from both sides. It was very likely that he would die on the spot. Crack. Soren used his dagger to block the trigger. He then twisted the trigger. 2 throwing knives shot out from the top of his head and nailed into the wall beside him. A row of data appeared. Successfully disarmed trap. Your rogue skills have been improved. You have received 50 profession EXP. Successfully disarmed trap. Your rogue skills have been improved. You have received 120 profession EXP. Phew. Soren let out a sigh of relief. He relaxed a little and muttered, "Sure enough, disarming traps gives more EXP. But this thing is also very dangerous." After dismantling 2 traps in a row and adding in the experience gained from picking locks, Soren finally accumulated 200 experience points. Without hesitation, he chose to level up his rogue class. Rogue class raised to level 2. Received 23 DX 19 plus INT 18 to 10, *0, 5, skill points. Health increased by 9, profession HP 6 plus, con 15 to 10, *0, 5. Received 1 free attribute point. Compared to the skill points that could be obtained at every profession level, it was much harder to obtain free attribute points. He had to level up 2 professions in order to obtain 1 free attribute point. In other words, he would have to wait until his rogue class reached level 4 before he could obtain any more free attribute points. This free attribute point could be said to be very precious. Soren glanced at his attribute panel. Without hesitation, he allocated the free attribute point to dexterity. 20 attribute points was a threshold. If a player had less than 20 attribute points, they would still be in the range of normal people. If a player had more than 20 attribute points, they would be in the range of normal people. The sound of footsteps came from outside the warehouse. Soren agilely jumped up. His arm grabbed onto the roof beam and then he quietly snuck out. It was only a 1 dexterity point increase. It was enough for him to do many difficult moves that he couldn't do before. Whether it was his body's reflexes or his agility, they were all beyond the range of normal people. A man quickly came in. He glanced at the warehouse. His expression changed slightly. He shouted loudly, Soon a group of armed guards rushed in from outside. It seemed like he couldn't come back to this warehouse in the future. Since they found out that a thief had entered, they would definitely strengthen the security. Chapter 7. As expected. When Soren went out in stealth and pretended to be passing by, there were already 2 fully armed guards standing at the entrance. There must be something valuable in there. Since there was no other way, Soren could only look for his next target. There were plenty of opportunities to pick locks in the docks, enough for him to level up his rogue class to level 3. Once he reached level 3, normal locks would no longer be able to improve his rogue skills. He would have to find a way to sneak into Amber City and pick locks that were more advanced. However, having the ability of a level 3 thief was more than enough. Under normal circumstances, there would be a hidden treasure cave near every city. Other than traps and monsters, there would also be a treasure chest. That was the only rare item that players could obtain in the early stages of the game, and its value would definitely be shocking. Under normal circumstances, such a treasure cave would require a team of level 5 adventurers to take it down, but this was the advantage of a rogue. If they were skilled enough, even a level 3 rogue could sneak in alone. Caves were a special geographical environment, and rogues would have a +5 bonus to their stealth ability. The dark caves would make it easier for them to go into stealth. All of the skill points were allocated to stealth. Soren immediately increased stealth to 68 points. Steal was not very useful at the moment, and 35 points were enough for him to steal from slower targets. This was a piece of cake for a legendary rogue. Soren could easily determine which pot-bellied merchants would not notice him stealing. As for pick locks, he already had 45 points, which was more than enough for him to deal with normal locks. He would only need to level it up when he entered Amber City. The lowest skill was trap. It was fine for disarming simple alarms, but it would not be enough to deal with the traps in the treasure cave. The next time Soren leveled up, he would need to increase trap to 30 points. If that's the case, when the rogue class reaches level 3, I'll be able to obtain an additional class ability. Soren's figure wandered around the crowd. When he came out, he had a few silver dirhams in his hand. With 20 points of dexterity, he could steal whatever he wanted before anyone could react. Not to mention he also had 2 very good personal abilities. Nimble left hand, personal ability. Rogues have developed an extremely nimble left hand after a long period of training. Permanently increases their dexterity by 1 point. At the same time, they gain an additional 3 points when stealing, picking locks and disarming traps. It is said that the exercise of a certain waste paper can also train the dexterity of the hands. Alternating the use of both hands can increase the dexterity of the hands by 2 points. However, one must be immune to the Constitution test, otherwise the Constitution will be reduced by 3 points. Eidetic memory, personal ability. Long-term training allows you to have eidetic memory. You can easily remember the targets you've seen. Permanently increases intelligence by 1 point and gains an additional 3 points during memory judgment. If you can remember the names of more than 100 actresses, your intelligence will be permanently increased by 3 points, but your charm will be decreased by 5 points. There is a chance to learn the obscene aura. Please ignore the contents in brackets. Stupa. The former was a very rare personal specialty. The latter, on the other hand, was a special specialty that could be cultivated but was not so easy to obtain. Many spellcasters had spent a lot of effort to train themselves to obtain the eidetic memory ability. A day passed quickly. Soren broke more than a dozen locks in the dock area and stole some valuables at the same time. If it was in the past, there would be people coming over to collect the tributes. There were 1 or 2 level 5 warriors in the guild, and Soren was no match for them at all. A qualified warrior would have at least 15 points of strength, and they would also have a very good weapon specialty as well as the corresponding combat skills. Warriors with level 5 and above had special combat talents, and their strength could reach more than 18 points. Soren in the past had not undergone any professional combat training, so he was no match for them at all. There were no guilds to exploit him, and all these things belonged to him alone. It was a relatively good income. Soren stole a total of 12 silver dirhams, which was enough for him and Vivian to spend for more than a month. He also accumulated more than 200 profession EXP. The rogue class needed 500 EXP to reach level 3. Based on his current progress, it would take him at most a day to level up his rogue class. Level 10 commoner, level 5 rogue. At this level, Soren would be able to master a special ability called Shadow Strike. Among the Tier 2 professions, rogues who specialized in stealth and mastered Shadow Strike were the most dangerous. They had the ability to kill others in one hit. The slums. When Soren returned to his small hut, he immediately heard voices coming from inside. He pushed open the door and walked in. He saw a beautiful young priestess sitting on a stool. When she saw Soren, her expression immediately turned cold. She humphed softly as a greeting, then smiled at Vivian. "Since he's back," she said, "then I'll take my leave. You're alone here, so be careful. If you need anything, you can find me at the Dawnlight Shrine." Vivian nodded obediently, then thanked her. "Thank you, Sister Annalyn." The young girl was a trainee priestess of the Dawnlight Shrine. She believed in the god of the light of dawn, Karl Soros, a god that fell soon after the Chaos Era. Karl Soros was a god under the god of light. During the Chaos Era, he was the first to be attacked by the abyssal demons. More than half of the gods under the god of light had fallen. It would not be long before this young girl lost part of her divine ability. Her name was Annalyn. After meeting Vivian by chance, she had taken a liking to her. She helped Soren because of this young girl. Unfortunately, her divine ability was too low to heal Soren's injuries. As a priestess who believed in the light of dawn, Annalyn actually hated Soren, who was a rogue. That was why she did not treat him well most of the time. Perhaps in her opinion, it was because of these thieves and bandits that Amber City's security had always been so bad. What happened? Soren waited until the young priestess left before crouching down and gently stroking Vivian's head. Why did she come? Vivian glanced at him and whispered, "Someone was sneaking around here today. I think it was Cole's men. Luckily, Sister Annalyn came and scared them away. She also healed the wound on my back." Vivian raised her small hand and lifted her shirt. The dark purple bruise on her back had already dissipated, making the light healing potion that Soren had bought through a special channel useless. There were no blacksmiths or potion shops in the slums. If one wanted to buy these items, they would have to buy them from the black market. This was how many weapons were sold. Soren's eyes flashed with murderous intent. He did not expect Cole to be so bold as to send someone after him right after he had refused to meet him. Did he really think that he was a pushover? "I'll take you to the city tomorrow. Let's find an inn to stay in first." Soren passed a piece of candy he had stolen to Vivian and whispered, "There are guards patrolling the city. The security there is much better than here. You'll be safer there." Vivian nodded her small head and reached out her small hand to take the candy. She opened the packaging and put it into her mouth. She immediately smiled happily and said, "Big brother. It's so sweet and delicious. You should have a piece too." She put a piece of candy into Soren's mouth with her small hand. She was always so easily satisfied. Even the cheap candy in the slums could make her happy. Soren's face showed a trace of a smile, and he opened his mouth and ate a piece as well. It was astringent but sweet. This was a low-quality malt candy that many nobles in the city would not even spare a glance at. This was the only one in the slums. Vivian stood up from the bench and patted the dust on Soren's clothes with her small hand. She whispered, "Sister Annalyn is a good person. No one was willing to help us when you were unconscious. Only she was willing to help." Soren smiled and scratched her small nose. He whispered, "I know. She's a good person. If there's a chance, we'll repay her." Even though the priestess hated him, he could not deny that he owed her a favor. Soren was a person who could clearly distinguish between kindness and hatred. The sky was dark. The two of them began to prepare dinner. Soren brought back some smoked meat and some oil, salt, and seasoning. The corpse in the furnace tavern had already been found. The people nearby looked at him with a trace of respect. Occasionally, when they smelled the fragrance of the meat, they could not help but swallow their saliva. Vivian ate a lot. Her small belly was bulging. When she saw Soren's mischievous gaze, she could not help but blush. She waved her small fists in embarrassment. It had been a long time since she had eaten meat. Today was very satisfying. Soren just lovingly stroked her small head. The two of them chatted casually. When the sky gradually darkened, they climbed into bed. Night fell. Soren, who had been lying down with his eyes closed, opened his eyes. He then carefully pulled out the arm that was hugged by Vivian. He tiptoed out of bed, put on his clothes, and put the dagger behind his back. There was a problem. It was better to solve it as soon as possible. Soren glanced at Vivian, who was sleeping soundly on the bed. He then carefully closed the door and left. Night was the time to kill. Soren did not have the energy to worry about these trivial matters. He also did not want these people to threaten Vivian's safety. Since they dared to set their sights on Vivian, then they can all go to hell. In the shadows of the darkness, Soren's face was expressionless. His figure gradually became hazy, and a trace of cold killing intent appeared in his eyes. Cross Alley was still very lively. This was the most prosperous place in the slums. Of course, it was only compared to the other rundown areas. Cole became the new leader. He gathered a group of scoundrels from the slums and fought for this piece of fat meat in the slums. There were dozens of prostitutes here and many of them were quite beautiful. Occasionally, people from the dock area would come to have fun. Therefore, controlling this place was an important source of income in the slums. Because they had just fought with another group of scoundrels a few days ago, many people in Cross Alley were armed. There were also fewer customers who came to have fun. The prostitutes stood on the side, bored. Occasionally, Cole's men would pull one of them into a low shed. In the darkness, a figure appeared silently and approached them through the shadows in the corner of the wall. The slaughter had just begun. Chapter 8. Asterisk Creek. Asterisk a hook-nosed thug walked out and cursed, "UF asterisk cur. I told you to use your mouth. If it wasn't for the fact that you can still make some money, I would have taught you a lesson." He turned around the railing and entered an alley. He then took out his weapon and was about to pee. There were almost no toilets in the slums. It was even more smelly and filthy than London in the 19th century. If you were to walk in an alley, you might accidentally step on other people's excrement. Therefore, no nobles or rich people would come here. Even the guards were too lazy to patrol the area. They were simply left to fend for themselves in the slums. *CK. I'll teach you a lesson sooner or later. As soon as the hook-nosed thug finished speaking, he suddenly felt a chill on the back of his neck. Before he could take out his weapon, an arm covered his mouth. Then a dagger flashed in the dark and slit his throat. Blood spurted out far away, gurgling out. The figure behind him grabbed his neck and didn't let go until the body stopped convulsing. At this time, Soren's figure appeared from the shadows. His face was expressionless like the Grim Reaper. Once he entered battle mode, he would not have the slightest bit of mercy. Otherwise, he wouldn't have been able to enter the realm of legends alive. He dragged the body into the alley. Blood covered the ground. Fortunately, the darkness covered everything. "Where's Cabot?" Another scoundrel cursed as he walked out and said in dissatisfaction, "Taking so long to pee. The boss is looking for him." The thug looked around and clearly felt that something was wrong because he had just fought with another gang the day before yesterday. He vigilantly took out his dagger and approached the side of the alley. The smell of blood filled the air. The thug's expression changed. He opened his mouth and wanted to call for help, but the shadows suddenly twisted. A dagger pierced his heart from the back, and a strong arm strangled his neck, forcing him to swallow back the scream that had already reached his throat. Shadow hiding successful. Backstab activated. Successfully activated Backstab X2, dealing 16 damage to target. Target killed. Extracting soul energy from target, received 30 EXP. Soren dragged the second corpse into the alley. After killing 2 people in a row, the smell of blood inside was very strong. The people nearby even felt something and immediately locked the door. Clang. Soren picked up the other dagger and walked out with both hands at the same time. The smell of blood on his body was very strong. There was no point in continuing to hide. The other party would soon be alerted. There weren't many masters in the gangs in the slums, and there weren't many people with professional templates. It was enough for him to kill 2 of them. Thud thud. Soren jumped up from the wall and landed on the roof. His 20 points of dexterity allowed him to walk without making any sound. He picked up a tile and threw it down, instantly alerting the other people inside. 3 armed thugs walked out. The leader was Gallas, whom they had met earlier in the day. He looked around vigilantly, then beckoned his men to walk to the side of the alley. Ah! A shrill scream echoed in the air. Soren's figure descended from the sky like an eagle, pouncing on one of the thugs behind. The dagger cut from his back all the way to his waist. His other hand drew a cold light and pierced the man's skull through his chin. There was no hesitation. Soren lifted his leg and kicked the corpse away. He then threw the dagger in his hand and stabbed the second enemy in the heart. "It's you?" The leader of the thugs shouted and pulled out his long sword. His expression was ugly as he said, "Are you crazy?" Clang clang clang. Soren's dagger drew a strange trajectory in the air, continuously blocking the enemy's attacks. He said in a low voice, "You shouldn't have targeted Vivian. So I can only send you all to hell." Rogues could never fight a battle of attrition with a warrior. Soren had always remembered this, so after the 3 consecutive strikes from the military swordsmanship, he stepped to the side and slid a kick. His other hand glowed with a cold light as he cut the enemy's waist. Garrus is a vigilant fellow. Ever since he came back injured from his adventure, he had been wearing leather armor when he slept. The armor was made of tough leather so the dagger couldn't penetrate it. The only way was to attack the parts of his body that weren't covered by leather armor. Fresh blood oozed out. Gallus held his waist and felt numb. His expression was ugly as he said, "It's poisonous." He remembered it clearly. Soren shouldn't have received any formal training, so how could he be so familiar with the military swordsmanship? He found the flaw in his attack in the blink of an eye. Yes. Maybe Soren didn't know this in the past, but the current Soren couldn't be more familiar with Gallus swordsmanship. Soren was very familiar with the advanced cross swordsmanship, white raven swordsmanship, reverse slash swordsmanship, and so on. If a legendary rogue didn't even know his opponent's moves, how could he reach the legendary realm? Gallus was just a thug from the slums. Unless he had some special encounter or could afford the expensive learning fees, he could only master low-level military swordsmanship. It was a basic swordsmanship that could increase the user's basic hit rate by 3 points and use sword form, heavy hack at the same time. Clang. Sparks flew out. Soren's footsteps drew a strange trajectory. He suddenly turned from the front to the enemy's back and stabbed into Gallus' neck. He then flipped the dagger around. Plop. Gallus' corpse fell to the ground. Soren took a moment to catch his breath, then said in a low voice, "To be able to die under Shadow Step, you're worthy of your class." This was the ability of a legendary rogue. However, Soren didn't have the ability to master Shadow Step. The real Shadow Step was to cross the shadow plane and appear behind the enemy's back. He just used the technique in the moment he hid in the shadows to confuse the enemy's vision. Legendary rogues had already understood the essence of Shadow Step. They could use the power of Shadow Step to cast many spells in battle. If it weren't for his 20 points of dexterity, which allowed him to imitate many of the fighting techniques from the past, he wouldn't have been able to kill these villains so easily. In less than a minute or two, 3 more corpses were left on the ground. Night under the shadow of the night. Everyone in the vicinity was hiding. The prostitutes were trembling in fear behind their doors. Soren picked up one of the corpses and barged in through the door. There were many gangs in the slums, but these were the true core members. Those thugs were useless. With Soren's current skills, he could easily kill these thugs like cutting vegetables. Most of the class holders could easily take on 10 normal people at once. Whoosh! The sound of a crossbow being fired could be heard. Soren, who was carrying the corpse, immediately let go of it. He actually ran 3 steps horizontally across the wall before landing on the ground and pouncing towards the enemy in front of him. This skill that was beyond the knowledge of ordinary people made the enemy stunned for a moment. Before they could react, 2 of them clutched their throats and fell to the ground. Large amounts of blood gushed out. Soren's reaction was simply too fast. He dodged the sword by a hair's breadth and kicked a stool into the enemy's face. He then grabbed the enemy's arm and directly cut his tendons with his dagger. With a cry of pain, the flying dagger slashed across the throat, leaving a half-foot-long gash in the throat. Large amounts of blood gushed out. Thud. Soren lightly hooked a crossbow with the tip of his foot. He quickly fiddled with it, kicked open the door and shot forward. An arrow was shot. There was a muffled groan in the room, followed by a cry of pain. "So, Soren. Don't kill me. I'll let you be the boss. You'll be the boss from now on." Cole was a gloomy middle-aged man. But at this moment he was holding his arm with a face full of fear. He kept begging, "Don't kill me. I'll listen to you from now on." A cold light flashed. Soren expressionlessly slit his throat. He then frowned as he looked at the bloodstains on his body. He then began to search the room for valuables. There were a total of 11 people. Almost all the core members of the gang. 3 of them had advanced to class holders. Unfortunately, they were all level 1. Except for Gallus, who could block a few of his attacks at the beginning, the rest were basically no match for him. After all, there were no experts in the slums. The people here lacked food, money, and energy to train. The only reason they could advance to class holders was because they had experienced too many street fights. A level 1 warrior with proper training could fight 2 or 3 people head-on. Soren pulled up a piece of bedsheet and rolled all the valuable items into it. Finally, he tied it into a big package and carried it directly to the front. Some people were secretly looking around. But no one dared to come out. This was not something they could interfere with. They waited until Soren's figure left. Immediately, several men stealthily approached and fiercely glared at Lei Feng, who was not far away. Then they rummaged through the wealth on the corpse and ran into the house to take away the valuable things. This gang was already destroyed. Tomorrow there would be other gangs coming to replace them. If they did not take advantage of this opportunity, they would not have another chance in the future. This was the slums. It was normal for something like this to happen. Chapter 9. The next day. When Vivian opened her eyes, she rubbed the corners of her eyes in a daze and was about to get up to make breakfast. There was already a bowl of fragrant oatmeal in front of her. Then she saw Soren's smiling face. He was holding an iron pot in his hand and wearing an apron, looking a little funny. He was seriously frying a poached egg. Brother. Isn't it too wasteful? Vivian took a deep breath of the fragrant oil and reached out her small hands to hug Soren's neck. She stood on her tiptoes and kissed his cheek. She also quietly sniffed his body and smelled a faint scent of blood. She didn't know why, but since she was very young, she was very sensitive to the smell of blood. If Soren's body was stained with blood, it would be very difficult to hide it from her. The smart little girl didn't ask too much. She only said with some pity, "Brother, you put too much oil. You only need a little oil to fry the egg. Next time let me do it. You see, so much oil is wasted." After saying that, she sniffled. It was as if she was satisfied just by smelling the oil rising from the pot. It's done. Little housekeeper. Soren put the badly fried egg into the bowl and rubbed Vivian's little head. He said helplessly, "I'll let you do it next time, okay?" It was a very sumptuous breakfast. The fragrant oatmeal was very delicious. When the fried egg was put into the bowl, a layer of oil immediately floated on top of it. There were also a few pieces of bacon that were cut into thin slices. Just looking at it made one want to eat. This was a breakfast that only the nobles and rich merchants in the city could afford. Vivian hadn't eaten such good food in a long time. After enjoying this sumptuous breakfast, the little girl cleaned up the house. The little girl started to clean up the room. Sauron's clothes also needed to be washed. There were faint sounds of people outside. It seemed that some people had deliberately passed by this street many times. Soren was sitting at the door, carving something. He looked very serious as he held a dagger. "Sir Soren." Finally, a guy who didn't look like a good guy walked over and said with fear, "Save thanks you for helping him solve a problem. That's why I'm here to give you a gift." He waved his hand behind him, and two fierce-looking fellows came over timidly with a gift box in their hands. Soren raised his head and looked at them. He then gestured for Vivian to accept the gift and said slowly, "I'll take it. I'm not interested in the slums anymore. It's Savi's business whether those streets can take it or not, as long as they don't disturb my life. Can I?" His voice gradually turned cold and the dagger in Soren's hand turned into a blur. The leader of the villains wiped his cold sweat and felt a chill on his neck. He stammered, "No, no problem. That's what Savi thinks too." In one night, the core members of the enemy's gang had been completely wiped out. When Save heard the news, he was almost ecstatic. He thought that those idiots had provoked some terrifying enemy. But when he found out that the person who did it was Soren, his face immediately turned ugly. "Boss." A smart thug ran in and said while panting, "I found out. It seems that Cole threatened Soren and sent people to take his sister hostage. Everyone in Dongo Street knows that Soren values his sister more than his own life. Cole targeted his sister, and that's why Soren killed them all. I've never seen him do anything before. I didn't expect Soren to be so strong. Right now, everyone in Cross Alley is calling him Throat Cutter. Even the people at the docks have heard of his name. 11 elites from different sects had their throats slit, and their blood covered the floor of the room. Boss, should we take care of him?" A one-eyed thug looked at the others and said hesitantly, "Although he's strong, he's still just one person. If we let him grow, I'm afraid we won't be able to take over Crossroads Alley." Clang. Save threw something at the thug. The thug's face was covered in blood. He said with a pale face, "Take care of him? Is there shit in your head? He killed so many of Cole's men in a direct confrontation. If he ambushes us, we'll all be killed. Don't act rashly. Send Chong over with a gift. Let's see what he's up to. If Soren is so strong, he'll leave the slums sooner or later. Why would someone like him stay in this godforsaken place? Also, send someone to keep an eye on Crossroads Alley. See if Soren has any intention of taking over the place. If not, don't let anyone else take it." The thugs began to get busy. Only Save hesitated for a moment, then called out to one of them, "Tell Chang to come over first. I'll prepare the gift myself." If Soren could kill Cole and his men in the middle of the night, he could probably kill him as well. This kind of person was too dangerous. It was better to think of a way to get on his good side. The reason Save was able to become a gang leader from a street thug was because he knew when to yield and when not to push himself. He didn't leave anyone alive. Even a ruthless gang leader like him was a bit scared. After all, the number of casualties in street fights wasn't high. They would try their best to prevent their men from dying. If everyone died, who would still work for them? Although the thugs in the slums were brainless, they wouldn't be stupid enough to join a gang leader if their men kept dying. It was a quiet morning. Of course, that was only relative to Soren. After receiving his reply, Save was immediately overjoyed. He ordered his men to gather and prepare to take over the streets near Crossroads Alley. Since Soren said that he wasn't interested in the slums, the area near Crossroads Alley would belong to whoever had the ability to take it over. Save gathered hundreds of people today. Although most of them were just there to make up the numbers, there were still hundreds of people who were capable of killing people. As for how many of these people had undergone professional combat training and had learned real killing techniques, Save didn't know. He shouldn't have high hopes. No one cared about the gang fights in the slums. As long as it didn't cause too much trouble, it didn't matter if a dozen or so people died. Therefore, when Save gathered his men, they quickly took over the area near Crossroads Alley. It was a far cry from the docks. Since the docks controlled almost half of Amber City's wealth, it was possible that hundreds of people would die in a single night if there was a change in territory. This was something that would shock the entire Amber City. The slums? It was as broken as a bird's nest. What was there to pay attention to? Yes, those who were truly powerful had no interest in the slums. However, recently they had heard that a very powerful person had appeared there. Apparently his name was Throat Cutter Soren. It was said that all the enemies he killed had their throats slit. He had a very high reputation in the slums. Although he didn't belong to any faction, all the gang leaders in the slums respected him. 2 days had passed. Even Vivian was sensitive enough to notice that something was wrong. The people around her were looking at her with a hint of respect, and they were hesitant when talking to her. As for Soren, they didn't even dare to look him in the eye. Big Brother is a lot more powerful than before. Vivian was sweeping the fallen leaves with a broom. She looked outside and muttered, "It was one of Save's men who sent the gifts the other day. Why would he send such an expensive gift? I heard that Cole's men are all dead. They were all killed by someone called Throat Cutter. That Throat Cutter should be Big Brother, right? Sounds very powerful. Big Brother is a lot stronger than before." Yesterday, when she passed by the grocery store at the corner of the street, the fat shopkeeper who used to hit her back with a stick saw her and her face turned pale. When she confirmed that she was Soren's sister, the fat shopkeeper knelt in front of her and slapped herself so hard that her face was swollen. She only stood up gratefully when Vivian promised to let bygones be bygones. The shopkeeper even prepared a gift with more than 10 silver dirhams in it. He respectfully said that it was to help Vivian get over the shock. They were afraid. Although they were afraid of Soren the Throat Cutter, Vivian still enjoyed the feeling of fear. La. The little girl hummed a tuneless ballad and happily cleaned the room. "We are bad guys. We are villains. They are afraid of us. No one will dare to bully us anymore." Chapter 10. 2 days had passed. The massacre in Cross Alley had already settled down. Soren thought that it would at least alert the guards of Amber City and that he would be prepared to escape. However, he did not expect that they did not even care about the life and death of the slums. It was not until Soren wandered around the docks for 2 days and leveled up his rogue class to level 3 that he realized why the guards of Amber City did not care about the escalating conflict between the gangs and the slums. The reason was simple. Something more serious had happened in Amber City. Although the guards had tried their best to suppress the news of this incident, it was still leaked out one after another. Someone was skinned. The gray area of the docks had been quietly spreading the news. The person who was skinned was a poor night watchman. When the guards found him, all that was left was a bloody corpse. This was not a simple skinning incident because the human skin that was peeled off could be said to be perfect, without a trace of damage. Furthermore, it was placed in the most conspicuous corner, as if mocking the guards' incompetence. There were only 2 kinds of people in the world who could do such a skillful skinning. One was the fallen followers of the evil gods of hell, and the other was the followers of the demons from the abyss. Those who knew the news were panicking, especially the nobles who tried their best to put pressure on the guards because the night watchman was skinned when he reported the time in the nobles' district. Followers of evil gods or demons had sneaked into Amber City and were active near the nobles' district. The guards were now in a mess. They were desperately trying to find any clues and were not in the mood to care about the life and death of the slums. After the news was spread, many forces, both inside and outside the city, had restrained themselves, especially those who wandered in the gray area of the docks. Recently they had started to limit the number of times they acted. Since the skinning incident had happened, it would not end just like that. According to the gray area's understanding of the realm of darkness, those lunatics would not stop just like that. There would probably be more bloody incidents in the future. When Sauron heard the news, his heart was shaken, and then he realized something. This was a sign that the chaotic era was coming. Before the outbreak of the Twilight of the Gods, the first to act were the demons of hell. Their followers started bloody massacres, and the most common one was skinning. This was an evil and ancient ritual. It meant that a new soul had fallen into the chaotic evil faction. It also meant that an evil sacrificial ritual that would affect the entire southern dukedom had begun. Has the serial skinning incident already started? Soren was standing at a corner of the dock. His expression was solemn as he muttered, "Amber City. This should be the territory of the Southern Duchy. Although the name sounds unfamiliar, I think I've heard of this name before. Something big must have happened in Amber City before the upheaval. Otherwise, I wouldn't have been able to leave such a clear impression in so many cities. What happened?" Soren frowned as he tried his best to recall. Unfortunately, he didn't have enough clues. There were too many things that happened at that time. Even an ancient red dragon had appeared. Many people wanted to slay the dragon as if they were crazy. No one cared about what happened in a city in the Southern Duchy. Soren was also busy in the northern plains at that time, trying to find a way to kill the hill giant. Slaying the dragon? He wasn't that naive back then. However, as a level 5 rogue who didn't have any class advancement skills, trying to slay a hill giant by himself was already a crazy and risky move. A hill giant had a challenge rating of 10, which meant that a team of adventurers with a profession rating of 10 or higher would have a 50% chance of defeating it. The skinning incident has begun. Soren looked at the goods coming and going in the dock as if he could foresee the coming chaos. He muttered, "Looks like I'll have to take a trip to the hidden treasure cave." Power. This was the most important thing in the chaotic era. Power was the only thing that could ensure one's survival, and only power could protect everything that one cherished. The gods were coming. The era of the saints was about to begin. Mortals were not qualified to interfere with the trajectory of history, and no one could stop the arrival of this catastrophe. Soren did not think that he could do it alone, even if tens of millions of players could not do it. The only thing he could do was to accumulate more power before the chaotic era arrived. At least he could protect himself in the face of danger. 2 days. It was enough for Soren to find out the approximate location of the hidden treasure cave. Almost every city had a hidden treasure cave like this. It was said that it was the work of a powerful lich. It seemed that the lich was planning some kind of conspiracy, but unfortunately, it fell before it could complete its plan. Many people had explored these hidden treasure caves and found a lot of random things, including parts that could be used to make a lich's body. However, what really attracted Soren was the rare equipment in the hidden treasure cave. In this world, rare equipment was very rare, and the difficulty of obtaining them was much higher than expected. The hidden treasure cave was the only place where one could obtain rare equipment in the early stages of the game, and there was a certain chance of obtaining a legendary item. Since it was a place set up by a lich, then it must have something to do with the undead. As long as he inquired about the haunted places in the city, he would be able to find the location of the hidden treasure cave. In his previous life, these hidden treasure caves were already explored by others. Now there shouldn't be anyone competing with Soren. However, since he couldn't find anyone he could trust to work with him, he could only explore it alone. He could only hope that the difficulty wouldn't be higher than level 5. After all, there were hidden treasure caves with a difficulty of level 8 and above. At that time, 6 teams of adventurers were wiped out. Only the last team was lucky enough to complete the quest and obtained a lich's phylactery. Unfortunately, it was already damaged. After working at the dock for 2 to 3 days, Soren's class had reached level 3, and his attributes had also increased. Name: Soren. Race: half-elf. Attributes: Strength 12, Dexterity 20, +1, Vitality 15, Intelligence 18, +1, Wisdom 15, Charm 16. Alignment: Lawful Evil Class, Level 10 Commoner, Max, /Level 3 Rogue 125750, Grade 1 HP, 30-30 EXP, 360 Slaughter EXP, 120 Profession EXP, unassigned. Skill points, none attribute points, none status, normal profession skills, Sneak 78, Steal 35, Pick Lock 45, Snare 30 Legendary skills, Omnipotent Hands, Sealed, Weakened, Personal abilities, Nimble Left Hand, Eidetic Memory Profession abilities, Grasp of Shadows. Starting from level 3, the amount of EXP a rogue could gain from picking locks would greatly decrease. Only some complicated locks could give rogue EXP, and even the simplest alarm traps couldn't increase a rogue's skills. Locks that could give dozens of EXP in the beginning would only give a few EXP now. Therefore, Soren didn't need to waste any more time on them. After all, starting from level 5, rogues couldn't gain EXP from picking locks anymore. Every adventurer class would gain a significant increase when they reached level 3. For example, wizards could learn a spellcasting ability when they reached level 3. At the same time, they could learn grade 2 arcane magic. Paladins could learn Judgment of Evil when they reached level 3. Drool could learn Animal Perception when he reached level 3. The warrior class with the biggest increase should be the warrior class. They could learn a Tough Awakening which permanently increased their HP by 10 points and gained 5% physical damage immunity. These were the prerequisites for legendary warriors to learn absolute tenacity and unyielding resolve. Compared to other professions, the first profession ability a rogue could learn was very ordinary. It was the most basic Grasp of Shadows. In this special world, a person's strength included many aspects. Some of them were abilities that came with their profession, while others were abilities that they learned through training. For example, a personal ability was an ability that was learned through training, while a profession ability was an ability that most people of the same profession had. For example, rogues. Almost all rogues above level 3 had the Grasp of Shadows. Unless their attribute talent was too low, they couldn't even learn the most basic Grasp of Shadows. Therefore, most rogues had the profession specialty Grasp of Shadows, but they might not have the personal specialty Nimble Left Hand, or Eidetic Memory. Grasp of Shadows, profession ability. Rogues gradually feel the power of shadows through long-term training and battles. This power has gradually seeped into their blood, allowing them to hide better in the shadows. Rogue's skill level increases by 5 points when they are in stealth. When attacking outside of the shadows, they can deal an additional 1 point of shadow damage. When a profession reached level 5, they could become a grade 2 adventurer. At that time, rogues could learn a combat skill, Shadow Strike. The current Grasp of Shadows was the prerequisite for learning Shadow Strike. At this stage, many professions would have an obvious increase, but Soren liked to call it Extraordinary Awakening, because the other professions were similar. Toughness Awakening, profession ability. After a warrior's long period of training in battle, the bloodline power in his body has gradually surpassed the range of a normal person. Normal injuries are no longer a threat to him. Warriors permanently increase their HP by 10 points and gain 5% physical damage immunity. During abnormal status checks, they gain an additional +2 advantage. Then there was the profession ability of paladins. Judgment of Evil, profession ability. Paladins' firm beliefs have withstood many tests. When encountering evil targets, they can always easily identify them. This can prevent them from being deceived by evil targets. When a paladin fights with an enemy of the evil faction, they can pray for a trace of divine power of order. This power has already seeped into their blood, so every time they hit an enemy of the evil faction, they can add an extra point of holy damage. This was the prerequisite for vanquishing evil, and also the reason why there were so many paladins alive in the world. Their intuition towards evil was very sharp. Otherwise, this group of stubborn people would have been played to death by others. There wasn't much difference between profession abilities. Most of them were awakened due to the increase in profession level. This kind of ability would gradually strengthen as the profession level increased. Many profession abilities were the key to mastering top-level abilities in the legendary realm. For example, if a rogue wanted to learn the combat skill Shadow Step, they had to master a profession ability above Shadow Dominator. Chapter 11. There were not many places in Amber City that were haunted. Soren only needed to ask around a little to determine the approximate location of the hidden treasure cave. There was a mass grave about a kilometer north of the Agate River, and there were signs of ghost activity there more than once. This was one of the more obvious signs of a treasure cave. Liches like to place these caves in places closer to death. There are ghosts. Then we might need some holy water. In order to ensure Vivian's safety, Soren was not sure how long it would take him to explore the hidden treasure cave, so he decided to send her to the Dawnlight Shrine and let Priest Annalyn take care of her for a while. Annalyn was the priestess who had helped Soren before but always gave him the cold shoulder. With her taking care of Vivian, there should be no problem. Of course, the Dawnlight Shrine would not take in a little girl for no reason, so Soren had already prepared a sum of money to give to the shrine. The Dawnlight Shrine. Soren bowed slightly to Pastor Phil, who was in charge of the temple. When Pastor Phil received the money pouch from Soren, he heard the crisp sound of silver dirhams clinking against each other. Immediately, Pastor Phil smiled and said, "No problem. The Dawnlight God blesses all believers. This little girl can stay in the shrine for a while. Let her follow Annalyn as a priestess." This was a world that could not be separated from money. It was the same even for powerful priests. They needed to expand the faith of their God and recruit believers from the lower class. All of these things could not be separated from money. Maintaining a shrine required money, giving alms to believers required money, and holding sacred ceremonies required money. Now, even most of the priests in the shrines had begun to openly sell divine spells to cure diseases and heal injuries in exchange for enough wealth to maintain the shrines and expand their faith. What was the big deal about sheltering a little girl for a few days and selling a few gallons of holy water? The Dawnlight Shrine was not that powerful, and it was only ranked below the second tier in Amber City. Therefore, the nobles always had better choices when it came to offering offerings. Soren's donation was very valuable. It was a total of 60 silver dirhams. It was equivalent to the offerings that the Dawn Temple had received in the past half a month. It was enough for Pastor Phil to exchange his ritual utensils for 1 or 2 pieces of silverware. After all, these were silver coins made by the believers of the Goddess of Wealth. 20 of them weighed 1 pound. "Thank you, Pastor Phil." Soren politely expressed his gratitude, then turned to Priest Annalyn and said with a smile, "Vivian, I'll have to trouble you for the next few days." "Humph." The priestess snorted softly, but she didn't refuse. Although she still didn't like Soren, she liked the little girl beside her very much. Annalyn of course knew that Soren's money was not clean. It was either stolen or related to the gang fights in the slums. However, Pastor Phil had been preparing for the holy ceremony for her promotion for a long time. It wasn't easy to get Soren to donate such a large sum of money to her. Of course, she had to use it to prepare for the sacred ceremony. If they had 2 official priests, the Dawnlight Shrine would be able to quickly become a second-rate shrine in Amber City. "Vivian, stay with Sister Annalyn for now." Soren patted the little girl's head and comforted her. "I'll come and pick you up in 2 days." He had already told the little girl about it before he came. Vivian didn't object to Soren's arrangement at all. She just nodded obediently and said, "Okay. Don't worry about me. Vivian is a good girl. She won't run around." Soren leaned over and kissed her on the forehead. He then took the holy water and walked out of the Dawnlight Shrine. Since the skinning incident had already happened, he had to hurry up. Before the gods were forced to walk the earth as saints, shrines were probably the safest places in Amber City. They were shrouded in the divine power of faith, and there were also guards guarding the shrines. Not many evil beings dared to set foot in them. Even a second-rate shrine like the Dawnlight Shrine had 6 powerful shrine guards in addition to 1 official priest. Most of them were grade 2 and above. One of them even had the strength of a grade 3 shrine guard. Conservatively speaking, he was a level 10 squire, level 10 knight, level 5 shrine guard, or level 10 squire, level 10 warrior, level 5 shrine guard. The first profession level represented the basic profession before the profession advancement. For example, most native wizards had the profession level 10 scholar. This was because they needed to learn how to read and write before they could learn spells. For example, many professions that advanced into warriors had the prefix of level 10 militia, which meant that they had received militia level training before becoming an official warrior. As for Soren's profession level 10 commoner, it represented the lowest profession level. It didn't have the weapon mastery of militia, nor did it have the knowledge bonus of a scholar. The only benefit was that it gave players 25 skill points and allowed them to advance to any profession level, as long as they had enough innate attributes. The profession level didn't give any attribute points, but there were still some differences depending on the focus. For example, the best profession level 10 squire for melee combat was level 10 squire, which gave players an additional skill point for weapon mastery. However, this was only for the profession level player. If this profession level was applied to the NPCs, then Soren was born as a commoner. He had received a commoner's education since he was a child. The growth of his attributes during his childhood depended entirely on his luck. It was hard to predict whether he would become a genius or a mediocre thief. On the other hand, the grade 3 Temple Knight had received the Squire's education since he was a child. He had already received combat training since he was a child and had mastered most of the weapons. Therefore, some of his attributes were naturally higher than a commoner's, whether it was strength, constitution, etc. This would continue until he became a warrior or knight. Therefore, in the past, players would judge a commoner's profession level based on their profession level. Commoner professions were average, militia professions were slightly stronger, squires had higher attributes, and scholar professions had an innate knowledge advantage. In conclusion, temple guards were much harder to deal with compared to unorthodox warriors. Unorthodox warriors might have lower attributes than temple guards and could only master basic swordsmanship. However, temple guards would have higher attributes and could master more than 3 advanced skills at the same time. The sword form, cross/. After mastering cross swordsmanship left a deep impression on Soren. Mass graves. When Soren arrived, it was already afternoon. It took him half a day to find the entrance to the cave. It was a simple concealment device, more like a trap. A rock near the mass graves was moved 10 centimeters, and a dark cave entrance appeared on a small hill not far away. When Soren's figure entered the cave, the rock immediately returned to its original position and the cave entrance disappeared without a trace. As expected of the Lich's handiwork, Soren, who used to be a legendary thief, felt that the Lich's arrangements were extremely clever. It was completely dark. There were damaged torches on both sides of the cave. If a normal person entered without a torch, they wouldn't even be able to walk. However, Soren was a half-elf with 1/8 elf bloodline, so he had a certain level of night vision. Therefore he didn't need to light a torch to see everything in the cave. This was the reason why he dared to explore the cave alone. Stealth plus night vision equals noiseless. Not needing any lighting tools meant that he wouldn't alert the monsters in the cave. His safety factor was greatly increased. Soren's figure gradually merged into the darkness. With the awakening of shadow mastery, he could already feel the presence of shadow power. This feeling was different from before. In the darkness, his figure gradually became hazy, as if he had disappeared into the shadows. Only when he moved could he vaguely feel the slight changes in the shadows. His breathing, his heartbeat, and his smell were all covered by the shadows. Creak. Footsteps sounded in front of him. Soren gently pulled out his dagger and hid in a corner of the cave, waiting. The area of the cave wasn't small. After all, the Lich couldn't have just dug a hole in the ground. There were many underground passages, and many of them were guarded by monsters as well as traps set by the Lich. A skeleton appeared in front of Soren. There was no soul fire in its eyes, which meant that it was only a skeleton of the lowest level. Perhaps it was unconsciously guarding the cave because of the dense death energy. This kind of skeleton was relatively easy to deal with. Most players could deal with 1 or 2 of them, but it was impossible to kill a large group of them. This was because their strength was roughly equivalent to a trained militia, and they didn't have any fatal weaknesses. After all, skeletons were considered supernatural creatures. Even if it was the lowest level undead creature. Soren's figure quietly approached. The skeleton didn't notice him at all. It was holding a rusty iron sword in its hand, and it seemed to be an adventurer who had died while exploring the cave. The number of NPCs in the storyline wasn't any less than the players. There were even quite a few from the evil faction that cooperated with the players or even ambushed them from behind. Anyone who underestimated the world of Clash of the Titans would have to pay the price. A ray of cold light suddenly appeared in the darkness. Soren's figure emerged from the shadows, and he instantly stabbed the skeleton's spine with his dagger. Shadow hiding successful. Backstab activated. Successfully activated Backstab X2, dealing 18 + 1 points of damage to the target. The target is severely injured. This was the first time Soren's successful backstab didn't kill an enemy instantly. However, he wasn't surprised because the dagger in his hand was just a normal dagger. It didn't have any enchantments or supernatural abilities. It was very difficult to kill an undead creature in 1 hit. After all, undead creatures had the bonus of being a supernatural creature. Although the difficulty of the skeleton was only level 1, it had more than 30 HP. Without flesh, it was more durable than a normal person. Clang, clang, clang. The skeleton's battle instincts were still there, and its first reaction after being attacked was to slash down with its sword. Soren blocked the attack with his dagger, and he couldn't help but feel his body sink a little. It has more than 16 points of strength. Soren dodged the second attack and moved his slightly numb arm. He thought to himself, it must have been an advanced warrior when it was alive. Otherwise, it wouldn't have such high strength after becoming an undead. 10 points of strength was the standard for a normal person. 12 points of strength was equivalent to a laborer at the docks. 14 points of strength was considered to be quite strong for a normal person. 16 points of strength was equivalent to a weightlifter in his previous life. 18 points of strength was more exaggerated. It was the kind of person who could single-handedly slash a person with a weapon that weighed more than 50 kilograms without panting. Normally, those who could reach 16 points of strength were close combat professions that were specially trained. Attribute points were the most difficult thing to increase. It took 2 levels to gain 1 attribute point. Even if you reached level 20 and entered the realm of legends, you would only gain 10 points of attribute points. Soren's weakness was that he only had 12 points of strength. Because he didn't deliberately train his strength when he was young, and because he didn't have the bloodline of a god, his strength was similar to a laborer at the docks. As for his 20 points of strength, he could use a simple example. A hill giant. A giant that was about 5 meters tall and weighed close to half a ton. It usually wielded a mace that was as thick as an adult's waist as its weapon. That's right. This guy had the standard of 20 points of extraordinary strength. If it wasn't for his innate strength, many warriors wouldn't have 20 points of strength even after reaching level 2. Chapter 12. This is tomorrow's update. I have to go to Nanchang tomorrow. Because the automatic update can't be used for some reason, I decided to post it today. Clang, 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 clang. The dagger cracked under the continuous attacks. After all, it was just a normal weapon. Normal wear and tear was a very serious matter. Before Soren reached grade 2, he always carried at least 3 weapons with him so that he could use them as backup in case they were damaged in battle. Normal equipment could be bought from blacksmiths, but rare enchanted equipment was very rare. Soren only found a suitable weapon when he explored an ancient ruin. It must be mentioned that Soren's weapon was very special. It wasn't a dagger, but a scimitar. It was very difficult to buy a qualified scimitar in the southern cities, even if it was a normal white-grade weapon. This was because a white-grade weapon made of slightly better steel would cost around 5 Kindler coins. Therefore, for a long time, players who had just entered the Clash of the Titans were fighting to get a good white-grade weapon. As for the dagger in Soren's hand, it should be a gray-grade weapon. A real white-grade dagger should be a weapon made of folded steel. It's better to get a scimitar first. Soren leaned to the side and twisted his waist 180 degrees. The dagger struck the back of the skeleton's neck, instantly shattering the last trace of death energy. The skeleton's entire body scattered into broken bones. He looked at the 45 slaughter EXP he received and threw away the broken dagger in his hand. He muttered, "There aren't any scimitars in the southern cities. If I want to buy a suitable one, I'll have to go to a place near the grasslands." Soren naturally didn't use a normal scimitar. According to his strictest requirements, the scimitars he needed couldn't be found in the northern grasslands. Only the best blacksmiths in the Underdark could forge the scimitars he needed. The full moon scimitar in the Sage Desert was too light, and the eviscerating scimitar in the northern grassland was too brittle. The only weapon that Soren felt comfortable with was the heavy scimitar that had some of the characteristics of the Tang saber and the Damascus saber. This kind of scimitar was very heavy. Just the back of the scimitar was enough to kill an ogre, and its destructive power could be maximized. Soren had once cut through a 3-foot-thick marble with a single slash. 1 chi was about 30 centimeters and 3 chi was close to 1 meter thick. Even an adult dragon wouldn't be able to withstand the power of his saber. Otherwise, there wouldn't be a legend in the Underdark about a violent dual-wielding bandit. Some even said that if he hadn't become a lurker but a berserker, sword saint or weapon master, he might have been able to solo an ancient red dragon. Using a heavy scimitar in battle requires a minimum of 14 strength. Soren's original pair of scimitars was a legendary weapon that was specially forged in the Underdark. One of them weighed 18 kilograms, while the other weighed 16 kilograms. Only players with 18 strength could wield them. His figure gradually merged into the shadows. Soren didn't expect to be able to get a rare weapon right from the start. As long as he could get his hands on a high-quality military weapon, he would be satisfied. Generally speaking, a Kindler could be bought for about 15 Kindler coins. At this stage, the southern dukedom was still using the silver standard system. Silver dirhams were recognized as the currency, and gold could only be regarded as a precious metal. Even the Kindler made by the believers of the goddess of wealth was only circulated among the high-ranking nobles. A Kindler was worth 10 silver dirhams. Whether it was a kindler or a silver dural, 20 kindler coins weighed exactly 1 pound. As for the copper dirals, many of them were privately forged by the lower class. Many of them were crudely made, and the ratio between them and the silver dirals would fluctuate. The players had even cursed for a long time because of this. It was because the Clash of the Titans was so realistic that there wasn't even a unified currency. If it weren't for the goddess of wealth's currency lever, the conversion of the currencies of various races and regions would have made many people collapse. However, the extremely realistic rules of the world were still highly sought after by many people. Soren was one of them. To him, the Clash of the Titans was a completely different world. It was also an indispensable part of his life, and could even be said to be an extension of his life. This was why he accepted everything so easily. As they went deeper into the cave, the eerie feeling became more and more intense. Soren saw the first fork in the road, and there were 3 completely rotten corpses. "It's a trap." Soren picked up one of the corpses with one hand and muttered, "Looks like this guy was shot to death by a crossbow. There should have been a powerful crossbow trap set up here." 3 of the corpses' ribs were broken, and Soren could tell at a glance that this guy had been shot at least 10 times. It was difficult to set up a trap with so many attacks. Soren shrugged and found some silver dirals, some unknown rotten paper, and a bronze medal. He put away the silver dirals and looked at the paper. The words on it were completely blurred. As for the bronze medal at the end, he was very familiar with it. It was the symbol of the Adventurers Guild, an official level E adventurer. What an unlucky guy. Looks like after he died, his companions used his body to block a few traps. Sure enough, adventuring was the best way to make money. Soren only needed to search the corpses for a while to find more than 10 silver dirals and 2 shiny kindler coins. It was almost the same as the income he got from killing all the gangs in the slums. 1, 2, 3. Soren tossed the corpses aside. Perhaps it was because he had experienced too much in the Clash of the Titans, but now that he was facing the corpses in person, he felt nothing. Including the skeleton at the beginning, all 4 of them looked like warriors with leather armor. Spellcasters shouldn't join such a low-level adventurer team. What about the rogue? Wizards, priests, droll and warlocks were all typical tall, rich and handsome professions. An arcane missile scroll cost 30 kindler coins, so how could they join such a low-level adventurer team? Because of their insane combat power, all the spellcasters in the Clash of the Titans were respectfully called spellcasters. However, spellcasters were also a synonym for hardship. There were more than 30 types of Tier 1 arcane spells, and learning all of them through arcane scrolls would cost around 1,500 kindler coins. If they wanted to find a native teacher, they would only need to spend half of that, but it would still cost around 700 to 800 kindler coins. And that was only the cost of learning Tier 1 arcane spells. Droll priests could use divine spells, but whether it was the Divine Blessing Ceremony or the Nature's Gift Ceremony, it would cost more than 500 kindler coins to prepare. If they chose to worship a god, part of the cost would be covered by the temple, but it would still cost around 300 kindler coins. Although warlocks had the advantage of awakening their bloodline and could automatically learn magic, the bloodline advancement ceremony was even more expensive. If Soren remembered correctly, the first bloodline advancement ceremony would cost around 1,000 kindler coins. This was because his warlock companion had borrowed most of his savings. In comparison, melee professions had a much easier time. All they needed was a sword to kill people. Under normal circumstances, spellcasters were only around level 5, while melee professions had reached level 8 or even level 10. The difficulty of making money could be felt by looking at Soren's current net worth. More than 90% of spellcasters had to live a miserable life in order to save up such a huge amount of money. There was once such a saying in the tavern. An adventure with an uncertain return of more than 100 kindler coins would not be able to invite those spellcasters. Low-level spellcasters had low combat power. If they wanted to exert enough power, they would need to be at least 5 profession levels, so most low-level adventurers did not have any spellcasters. Therefore, Soren judged that there must be a rogue. Without a spellcaster's detection trap, which had a success rate of more than 90%, he could only rely on the rogue's profession experience. Don't expect too much of a rogue's chances of discovering a trap. At this stage, rogues were good at picking locks, but they did not have a good grasp of trap skills. There were many cases where they failed to dismantle a trap and died in it. Since there were high returns, there were also high risks. After a successful adventure without any casualties, it was necessary to treat everyone to a drink when they returned to the tavern. In fact, Soren did not have many chances to treat everyone to a drink in the tavern. So, Soren found the corpse of the rogue in front of the cave. He was not interested in judging why the rogue died here. Instead, he directly picked up the corpse and looked at the missing half of the head. His face was pale. A strong acid trap? It should be a strong acid trap. It was one of the most troublesome and fatal traps for rogues in the early stages. Otherwise, there were very few traps that could melt half of a corpse's head. There were many pits on the ground left behind by the strong acid. Looks like we're in trouble. Soren took out a small mallet and gently knocked on the ground. In order to prevent the traps from being triggered by rats, many traps were triggered according to the standard of an adult's weight. Therefore, halflings were always the most popular rogues among adventurers. Acid traps were divided into two types: magic traps and physical traps. The former was set up with a magic circle and then connected to a trigger device. The latter was set up with refined acid on the trigger device and sprayed out the acid after it was triggered, before entering the bloodline awakening stage. Even warriors with profession level 5 and above could be killed by the acid trap. Even if they survived, they would be almost crippled. In the later stages of profession enhancement, there were many bloodline awakening ceremonies. Although there were many warriors with high vitality who could withstand acid, explosion, lava and so on, they could still fight with vigor. But at this stage, Soren was not confident that he could withstand a strong acid trap. If he was hit, he would definitely die. Chapter 13. I have to make a trip to Nanchang later. Yesterday was the 4th watch, today is the 1st watch. I'll be back tomorrow. It was only a short distance of a dozen meters. Soren spent more than half an hour. The most troublesome part about traps wasn't how to disarm them, but rather the fact that you couldn't determine where they were hidden. This was especially true for traps that could kill in one shot. Many times you were risking your life when you were in danger. Even the slightest carelessness could cost you your life. This was also why many professionists would rather find a stable job than explore underground ruins. Found it. With his 15 points of wisdom, Soren was very sensitive to danger. Relying on his previous experience, he carefully pried open an irregular rock from the corner of the wall with his dagger. Sure enough, he found a complicated firing mechanism. There should be a trigger buried underground. If an adult's weight stepped on it, the trigger would activate the firing mechanism in front of him. Immediately, more than 3 crossbow bolts would shoot out from the wall. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Soren couldn't help but wipe off his cold sweat. He was secretly glad that he was careful enough. This was actually a multiple crossbow trap. If he wasn't careful enough, he would have been shot into a sieve. Unless he was wearing heavy armor, he wouldn't be able to block these powerful crossbow bolts. If he didn't remember wrongly, this crossbow trap's single target damage was around 12 points. If it didn't hit a vital point, 6 bolts would be enough to kill him in an instant. Gotcha. Soren used his finger to hold the trigger. He then laid on the ground and used his dagger to knock on the iron bar. This kind of trap was made of special steel. After a simple enchantment, it wouldn't rust for decades. Some of the traps in underground ruins were completely enchanted. Even after hundreds of years, it was still enough to kill. Pa 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 6 bolts shot out and sank into the wall on the other side of the wall. Soren didn't care about the dust on his face. He dug out the firing mechanism and found the location of the trap. A trigger, a firing mechanism, and a crossbow trap. Good stuff. A smile appeared on Soren's face as he dismantled them and put them into his bag. Thieves couldn't just close their eyes when setting up traps. Even a legendary thief wouldn't be able to set up a trap without the right materials. If he were to purchase these materials from the Mask of Shadows, he wouldn't even be able to buy them for at least 30 to 50 Kindler coins. After all, this was a trap that could instantly kill a warrior below profession level 5. A row of data appeared. Successfully disarmed trap. Your thief skills have been improved. You have received 210 experience points. Professional traps required a lot of experience, but it also required a high level of skill from a thief. Soren put away the other items, but he still assembled the crossbow launcher. They weren't ordinary crossbow bolts, but rather a box used to shoot crossbow bolts. Soren dug out the 6 bolts and put them back into the box. All he needed to do was to pull the trigger in the box, and all 6 bolts would be shot out at once. This device couldn't be fired in one shot. It had to be fully loaded before it could be fired. 6 bolts had to be fired at once. After all, this wasn't a regular crossbow. Soren removed one of the traps and continued to move forward. It seemed like there was only a strong acid trap here, but it had already been triggered by the unlucky thief. The price of a strong acid trap was even higher. It would cost around 100 Kindler coins to set it up. This was because there was a possibility of using a magic trigger device. The cave behind him became more and more crooked. At the same time, Soren relaxed a little. It was very difficult to set up a trap in this kind of environment, and it could easily be triggered by rats and the like. Therefore there shouldn't be any traps here. However, he didn't dare to let his guard down. He still carefully moved forward until a hidden stone door appeared in front of him. Creak. After confirming that there were no traps on the stone door, Soren gently pushed it open. Whoa! A cold wind blew past. Soren suddenly felt a chill on his back. Without hesitation he swung his weapon behind him. He only saw a hazy shadow appear. A ferocious ghost face revealed a miserable smile, and with a strange cry, it disappeared. A ghost? Soren carefully leaned against the wall and quickly took out a bottle of holy water. Ghosts were spiritual beings. Normal non-enchanted weapons couldn't hurt them. Even if they just stood there and let Soren hit them 100 times, they wouldn't be hurt at all. He could only use other methods to deal with them. Kiki. A strange laughter sounded, and the ghost's shadow appeared again. It let out a sharp howl. This was one of its innate abilities, the low-level, undead howl effect. It had the power of a fear spell. A timid person would have been scared stiff in an instant. Soren's eardrums hurt, but he wasn't afraid at all. He threw the holy water at the ghost. Clang. The holy water splashed all over the ghost's body. Suddenly a shrill cry sounded. The ghost's shadow quickly dissolved and disappeared. Luckily I was prepared. Soren wiped off the cold sweat on his forehead and picked up a small black stone on the ground. This was the ghost's soul fragment. When a spiritual being dissipated, it was possible for it to transform into a physical structure. This kind of soul fragment was a common recharge material. Necromancers liked it very much. The price was about 15 Kindler coins. The ghost challenge rating was level 5. Without something to counter it, it didn't matter how many people there were. This was because it wasn't afraid of physical attacks. However, if it was equipped with items like holy water, even a normal person could kill it. It was one of the most difficult to deal with but also one of the easiest. A row of data appeared. Holy water hit ghost, dealing 60 damage. Target killed. Extracting soul energy from target, received 120 EXP. Soren's EXP was enough to level up a rogue, but he didn't do so. It was too difficult to gain slaughter EXP. Normally, slaughter EXP was used to level up professions and subclasses. There was no need for rogues to use it before they reached level 5. If he encountered other traps, he only needed to remove 1 or 2 of them to level up. If he had the opportunity to subclass, slaughter EXP would be the most valuable thing. Creak. Soren pushed open the stone door of the secret room. Many things inside were covered in dust. There were a few books on the wall, but they were all damaged. There were spider webs on all sides and rat holes in the corners. This place had been abandoned for a long time. There was a stone table in front of him. On top of it were many odds and ends, such as an unknown skull, broken finger bones, dried bat corpses, and a black wooden box. No rare weapons, no magic devices. There was a hint of disappointment in Soren's eyes. There seemed to be nothing valuable in this secret room, except for the wooden box that he didn't know what was inside. He gently touched it, and after confirming that there were no traps, he carefully picked it up. It looks like ironwood? Soren looked around. He held the box in the palm of his hand, away from his head, and pried it open with his dagger. He couldn't tell if there were any magic traps inside. But thinking about it, a low-level treasure cave like this shouldn't have so many traps. Still, it was better to keep it away from his head. Crack. Soren pried open the box in front of him. There were 3 cards inside. It was as if they were out of tune with everything around them. The 3 cards were so exquisite, with mithril lace inlaid with fine diamonds, and in the center was a mage-wet that looked like a whirlpool. At first glance, everyone's gaze was drawn into it. It was as if this was something that could be created by the current civilization. Even the divine badge of the Holy Church wasn't as exquisite as this. Soren didn't know if he should be surprised or worried. This was because the cards in his hand were legendary magic items. Cards of all creations. This was a treasure left behind from the Arcane Empire. It was said that a legendary arcanist created it out of boredom. There were 108 cards in total, and each of them had a special magic power. They could give you unimaginable benefits, or they could bring you devastating disasters. No one knew what the deck of all creations would bring. Some people were drowned by 10,000 arcane gold coins after opening the cards, while others were struck by a powerful bolt of lightning after opening the cards. Item identification. Soren tried to activate the data flow in his mind. Soon, a row of small words appeared: cards of all creations, legendary item, X3, a trinket left behind from the Arcane Empire. It is the highest achievement of alchemy in the last age. Unimaginable things will happen after opening it. It is said that drawing a trump card will give you unimaginable power. Should I open it? Soren looked troubled. He gritted his teeth and took out a card. He bit his finger and dripped a drop of blood. Both sides of the card were the same. It could only be opened with fresh blood. No one knew what the card represented before it was opened. Not even legendary wizards could predict what it would be like before it was opened. A faint light appeared. After the first card absorbed Soren's blood, it rippled like a wave. Then the image in the center of the whirlpool began to appear. The first thing that appeared was a treasure vault filled with countless gold coins, gems, and equipment. This scene made Soren extremely excited because it meant that he was likely to draw a treasure card. However, then a wretched figure appeared at the entrance of the treasure vault. He was holding a bag and was desperately trying to fill it with treasures. Oh! Soren's face fell. He knew what he had drawn. Godly thief. A ray of light appeared on the opened card. Then a wretched figure appeared. He laughed eerily, and an ancient alchemy rune appeared on his palm. In the blink of an eye, everything valuable on Soren's body was stolen. Apart from the 3 cards in his hand, even his clothes were stolen. A gust of wind blew past. Soren shivered. He was naked from head to toe. Weapons, clothes, gold coins, holy water, tools. Everything on Soren's body disappeared. Even the box in his hand was gone. All that was left were the 3 cards. The wind blew. His butt was cold. Chapter 14. F***CK. Soren couldn't help but curse. He hurriedly picked up the bag and put it on himself. Luckily, he couldn't fit the items after the trap was removed. Soren made a bag out of the clothes of the dead and put the parts of the crossbow trap inside. After all, this was a real world. Soren didn't have a storage space, nor did he have a multi-dimensional bag. There weren't many things that he could carry with him. He didn't think that he would be able to escape from the trap. At least he still had the box for the crossbow and the clothes of the dead. As for the loot he obtained at the beginning, it was all gone. Damn it. I can't believe I got a godly thieving card. Soren was no stranger to this card. Someone had drawn it before and opened it in front of everyone. The result was obvious. Soren put on the badly damaged and moldy clothes and opened the second card. After the card was opened, it would turn into an ordinary piece of art. The magic attached to it would disappear. There were people who liked to collect these cards, but no one had ever collected a complete set. At that time, there were 3 sets of cards that were popular among the players. They were all left behind from the Arcane Empire: the Deck of Many Things, the Arcane Cards, and the Deck of Fate. The first set had 108 cards, the second set had 72 cards, and the last set had 36 cards. The easiest to get was the Deck of Many Things. The Arcane Cards could only be found in rare underground ruins. As for the Deck of Fate, there were only 3 until the fall of the gods. A faint light appeared. After the second Deck of Many Things absorbed Soren's blood, it spun like a whirlpool. The first thing that appeared was a barren land. There were almost no living things in sight. In the distance there was a boundless desert. In the middle of the desert, a hunched figure appeared. He walked forward with firm steps. His body was as firm as a rock and his eyes were fixed in the distance. The ascetic. A powerful force poured into Soren's body. After the tearing pain all over his body, endless fatigue surged in his heart. It felt as if he had traveled a long distance of over 10,000 kilometers. His body was already exhausted, and he was only relying on his tenacious willpower to hold on until now. A row of data appeared: Deck of Many Things, the ascetic, activated. Personal ability, Perseverance, awakened. Physique increased to 18. Magic modification completed. Soren felt an indescribable fatigue, but at the same time he felt a strong vitality. It was as if he had really traveled tens of thousands of miles and experienced countless wind, frost, and snow. His body had also become stronger and stronger during the long journey. After the endless fatigue he had a strength. It was as long as he did not fall, he would continue to move forward, and he would not stop until the moment of his death. Perseverance, personal ability. Your will has withstood the test of difficulty, and it has almost formed a kind of spiritual power that is almost tangible. When you face any charm-type control spells, you will gain an additional 5 points of immunity. I've earned it. Soren's face showed a hint of joy. It was as if he was grateful for his good luck. There were very few cards that could increase attributes in the deck of many things. Out of the 108 cards, only a dozen could increase attributes. Other than the 2 mysterious trump cards, the best card that had appeared was the Champion Knight. This card increased the user's strength to 20 points and physique to 18 points. Even though the person who opened the card was a wizard, he still became known as a violent melee wizard. This guy used to have a very high reputation in the Northern Plains. Unfortunately, he fell during the Blizzard War. It was because there were not many attribute points gained from leveling up that many people were looking for other ways to increase their attributes. Regular training was no longer effective for players who had solidified their hero template. Many people had to make a decision when they first allocated 90 attribute points. The reason why Soren was known as a violent dual-wielding rogue was because he gave up on charm and increased all his other attributes to 15 points. In other words, other than his unattractive appearance, his other abilities were at the peak of the average person's level. Items that could increase attributes were very rare. Most of them were legendary items. It was very difficult to obtain them, and they could only be increased by 20 points at most. After entering the realm of extraordinary, it was almost impossible to use items to increase attributes. My physique increased by 3 points. That's equivalent to 6 profession levels. Soren punched his chest. Even though he used 70% of his strength, his internal organs did not feel any discomfort. This meant that his physique was close to the realm of extraordinary. A normal person with 10 points of strength would not be able to hurt him. If his physique could reach 20 points, he would be able to awaken the extraordinary talent, Rebirth. It was the easiest extraordinary talent to awaken. The other talents could only be awakened after reaching 25 points of physique. Those who could reach 25 points of physique were already at the realm of legendary professions. As for the personal ability, Perseverance, it was a relatively common personal ability. Many people awakened it under difficult circumstances. Soren had awakened it in the fire elemental plane. At that time he was almost roasted to death. He was lucky enough to survive after falling into the lava. At the same time he also awakened the talent, Weak Fire Resistance. At that time, Soren's body was almost unrecognizable. In the end he had to spend a lot of money to hire a legendary priest to cast Greater Restoration, to save his life. During that time his strength, physique and dexterity all decreased by 10 points. He was almost a cripple. There's one more. Soren's eyes were filled with excitement as he looked at the last card, which was the deck of many things, after receiving such a shocking reward. If he could draw another card that increased his attributes, then his current attributes would be much better than when he was a hero. At the very least, his current charm value was now as high as 16 points, and he would no longer be as annoying as he used to be. His charm was so low that even the goblins didn't care about him. Even when he applied to enter the Elven Kingdom, he was rejected. Those damn elves from the Appearance Association. Since he had already used 2 cards, Soren naturally wouldn't leave the last one to rust. With a hint of frustration in his heart, he dripped his blood on the 3rd card. A blood-red light appeared. Soren's face instantly changed. He threw the card away as if it was scalding his hand. It was a summoning card. The card of 10,000 creations was unpredictable. No one could predict what would happen after activating it. There was a possibility of gaining power or obtaining treasures, but there was also the possibility of summoning monsters or even receiving damage. The blood-red light represented the abyss and hell. The holy light represented the gods of heaven. The 5-colored light represented the elemental plane. This card summoned creatures from hell and the abyss in the lower planes. A mysterious whirlpool appeared in the middle of the card. The image fell rapidly through the sulfur, lava and ice, and finally stopped at a ferocious and twisted face. Snake Demon. The card of 10,000 creations turned into a blood-red portal. After seeing the hideous face, Soren's general attributes immediately appeared in his mind. It was the data that the players had collected and evaluated. Snake Demon, Abyss Demon, Grade 3. Challenge Rating, Level 6 Monster Level, 12 Spell-like abilities Highest and lowest attributes, 21-10 Total attribute points, 85-95 Special abilities, Dual-wielding multi-attack, Challenge Rating, A+. The Snake Demon would grow an extra pair of arms as its strength increased. Each additional pair of arms would increase its challenge rating by 5 and its monster level by 6. In other words, the four-armed snake demon had a challenge rating of 11 and a monster level of 18. The six-armed snake demon had a challenge rating of 16 and a monster level of 24. As for the eight-armed snake demon, it was already a legendary existence. Under normal circumstances, the appearance of an eight-armed snake demon meant the arrival of a demon lord. There's no way I can fight it head-on. This was the first thought that popped into Soren's mind. His current rogue profession was level 3, while the snake demon's monster level was 12. There was a difference of 9 levels between them. The challenge rating of the team was 6, which meant that a team of at least 5 adventurers with excellent equipment and profession levels above 6 would have a 50% chance of defeating the snake demon in front of him. Although the two-armed snake demon summon was the lowest level, it was still not something that he could easily deal with at this moment. Abyss demons were supernatural creatures. Taking into account the difference in profession levels, the snake demon's HP and stamina were more than 3 times higher than his. There was almost no chance of winning if he faced it head-on. Several thoughts flashed through Soren's mind in an instant. However, his movements did not have the slightest hesitation. Just as a dark red teleportation door appeared in front of his eyes and sent the two-armed snake demon into the stone room, he quickly threw himself to the ground, took out the crossbow box and pulled the trigger. The teleportation was completed in the next moment. Swoosh, swoosh, swoosh. A painful scream echoed in the stone room. The snake demon was more than 4 meters tall and weighed more than 600 pounds. As soon as it appeared in the stone room, it was greeted by 6 powerful crossbow bolts. The bolts almost covered its chest, and most of them penetrated its scales and entered its body. The sudden attack caused the snake demon to go berserk. It did not even have time to check its surroundings before it waved its 2 swords wildly. Gotcha! The 20-centimeter thick stone table was split in half. Soren's eyebrows twitched when he saw this. Without hesitation, he threw away the box in his hand and dashed outside. 6 crossbow bolts were not enough to kill the snake demon. It was basically impossible to defeat it. Just by looking at the snake demon's fighting strength, it could probably cut him into pieces with just 1 strike. As soon as Soren fled, the snake demon madly chased after him. Most abyss demons were chaotic and evil creatures. Bloodthirsty, cruel, and murderous were their nature. They basically did not have the time to reason with people. Once the summoning was successful, unless you could enslave it, you would be killed by it. Chapter 15. Difficulty rating. A+. This meant that the Naga demon was the most powerful and the most difficult to deal with among all the monsters, with a challenge rating of 6. With a height of 4 meters, the Naga demon was able to create a huge gap in height between its opponents. Its 600 pounds of weight also gave it a much higher strength than normal creatures. Conservatively speaking, its 20 strength was enough to deal overwhelming damage to Soren. In other words, even if he managed to parry the Naga demon's attack, the damage he received would be enough to severely damage his internal organs. The Naga demon's talent for dual wielding made it one of the most dangerous close combat monsters. If its dexterity and wisdom were higher, it would be able to deal with multiple enemies at once without being at a disadvantage. Multi-strike was a very powerful combat ability. It meant that the Naga demon could continuously attack in a short period of time. If it had a high enough strength, it would be impossible to parry its attacks. The Naga demon was a demonic creature from the endless abyss. All demons had one thing in common. They had a layer of demonic skin, which was equivalent to a natural enchanted leather armor. If they were covered in scales, their defense was equivalent to that of a normal chainmail. For Soren, if he slashed the Naga demon 10 times, the damage he would deal would be equivalent to 3 slashes. However, Soren, who was only wearing a piece of cloth, would be sliced open by the Naga demon's attack. It's almost impossible to defeat. With 20 dexterity, Soren had an unprecedented ability to launch attacks. He twisted his body and ran along the wall, dashing into the tunnel outside. The 18 vitality brought by the ascetic card gave him more stamina than before. Although he was still mentally exhausted, it was enough to keep him running for his life. The Naga demon roared and chased after him. Its upper body was that of a humanoid creature. Its arms were unusually thick and its face was similar to that of a lizard or a snake. There were obvious scales on both sides of its body, and its lower body was a snake tail that was about 5 meters long. This meant that it was a male Naga demon, a powerful warrior among the Naga demons. This was the best news for Soren. The Naga demon was a matriarchal society. Females had a higher status and stronger combat ability. At the same time, they also had a certain amount of spell-like abilities. The Naga demon moved very quickly, especially when it was in its berserk state. It could dive down like a snake. This was also the main reason why the snake demon was rated as A+. It could rely on its huge body to easily break through the line of defense and approach the magic professions in the adventurer team. Then, in an instant, it would use its dual-wielding combat ability and multi-attack combat ability to cut the magic professions below profession level 8 into minced meat on the ground. Its snake-like body made it immune to most low-level control spells. Grease had no effect on it, spider web could not bind its 20 points of strength, and the demon's chaotic evil will made it immune to most low-level mind control spells. This was a monster that needed to be slashed to death. We can't escape. Soren was running as fast as he could. Using the complicated tunnels, he easily widened the distance between them. But soon he realized something important. If he wanted to escape, he had to reopen the secret door outside, which would take at least 3 minutes. 3 minutes was more than enough time for the snake demon to catch up to him. Then, it would cut him into at least 30 pieces of minced meat and pick out the most delicious ones to fill its stomach. I have to fight. When Soren passed by the place where he first found the corpse, he quickly picked up a long sword. Because too much time had passed, the body of the sword was slightly rusty, which meant that it was not sharp enough and could not withstand strong attacks. But now was not the time to think about that. It was almost impossible to defeat the snake demon in a direct battle. If he wanted to defeat it, Soren could only bet on his luck. Without hesitation, Soren ran towards another tunnel that he had not explored before. He had to take a gamble. Demons had more stamina than mortals. Their high HP meant that even if they were in a heavily injured state, they would still be a threat. The only way Soren could think of was to use the traps here to kill it. Of course, there was also the possibility that he would be the one killed by the traps. 20 points of agility. This was the domain of extraordinary humans. It meant that Soren's footsteps were lighter than a halfling's. It also meant that his reflexes were sharper than an elf's. It also meant that his body was more resilient than most normal lifeforms. He had to take a gamble. He had to gamble that there were powerful and deadly traps in this unexplored tunnel, and that they would not be triggered when he passed through it. Soren was a human. The area of his feet was very small, and 20 points of agility meant that he had a high chance of avoiding the traps. However, the snake demon was a snake-type demon. Its lower body was in contact with the ground, and its weight was more than 600 pounds. This meant that it would trigger most of the traps when it moved. Any traps that were set according to human standards and triggered by their weight would hit its body. Due to its size, there was no way for it to dodge. A wide tunnel appeared in front of his eyes. Soren did not even have time to observe whether there were traces of man-made traps nearby. Instead, he directly leaped, and then relied on his strong physical toughness and sense of balance to run 3 steps on the wall in a horizontal manner. Then he turned around and grabbed an inverted stalactite, forcing his body to move forward 5 meters against the wall. This was the most likely place to set up a trap based on his experience. Traps needed enough space to be set up, and the more hidden the trap, the more necessary it was. He did not stop at all. Soren began to slow down, but he still moved forward cautiously. The snake demon's figure appeared behind him. This demon from the abyss was completely enraged by the crossbow bolts. When it saw Soren, it did not hesitate to charge at him. Its huge body did not affect its movement speed at all. Most snake-type lifeforms had twice the speed of a normal human being when running at full speed. However, when it was about to reach Soren, the ground suddenly shook. Its long and narrow tail triggered the traps buried in the ground, and then a wave of crossbow bolts flew out from both sides. Roar! A painful howl sounded. 6 bolts were stuck in the snake demon's ribs and blood kept dripping. Its blood-red eyes were filled with killing intent and anger. When it saw Soren close by, it roared angrily. 12 crossbows. They could deal more than 120 points of damage to a human. It was enough to instantly kill most warriors below level 10, but it was not enough to seriously injure the snake demon. This meant that the snake demon's body was almost as tough as a lesser dragon, and its HP was probably more than 150 points, which was 5 or 6 times more than Soren's HP. There should be another trap. Soren's pupils shrank. He did not hesitate to increase his pace, even if it meant that he might trigger a trap. The layout of the tunnel felt familiar to him. This was because the place where he first found the corpse had a similar layout. This meant that there was a certain possibility that there was another acid trap ahead. This was fatal for Soren. Similarly, it was enough to threaten the snake demon's life. A winding passageway appeared. Soren's expression changed. He took a deep breath and began to run. The layout in front of him was similar to the place where he found the corpse of the thief. Acid traps were mostly buried near the walls, which meant that he could not use his dexterity to run through them. He could only try to jump through them. This was a distance of more than 10 meters. He did not have any spell-like abilities, and only his dexterity had reached the transcendent level. This was a challenge for Soren. I can do it. This won't be a problem for me. Soren took another deep breath. In his previous life, the human record for jumping was 10.6 meters. With his current physical fitness, he was not too far off from the best athletes. Even if he did not have enough strength, his dexterity allowed him to perfectly unleash his explosive power. It was not impossible for him to jump the distance in front of him. Bang! Soren's figure leapt out. He crossed the distance of more than 10 meters in an instant. He almost jumped out of this area in a rather embarrassing manner. Soren did not dare to hesitate. He was not sure if there was an acid trap here, so he took a deep breath and continued to run forward. Whoosh! Soren's figure suddenly froze. Just as he turned a corner, an iron spear suddenly came out from the ground. It pierced through his leg and instantly pierced through his thigh. If he did not move his body at the last moment, the spear would have pierced through his lower body and into his large intestine. Fresh blood spurted out. Soren clenched his teeth and crumpled his clothes into a ball. He then grabbed his thigh with both hands and slowly pulled it out of the spear. Large amounts of blood splattered out. The spear scraped off a piece of flesh, making the wound even worse. Soren's whole body was trembling. After the trembling, his body stiffened. In less than a second or two, his whole body was soaked in sweat. Phew! When he pulled his thigh out of the iron spear, he felt like he was about to collapse. He hastily used a rag to bandage his wound, then tightened his muscles and tied a dead knot. He then staggered to the edge of the stone wall. There was no way he could escape. If he continued to run with this kind of wound, he would die from blood loss even without the snake demon's help. With the loss of blood, his stamina was also rapidly decreasing. The only way he could survive was if there really was a strong acid trap in front of him. If it was just a crossbow trap, it would not be enough to kill the snake demon. Time was too long. When the snake demon appeared, Soren felt like he was facing his final fate. Fortunately, fate was on his side. Soren's judgment was not wrong. There really was a trap at the entrance of the passage, but it was not a strong acid trap. When the snake demon passed through, there was a violent explosion. Explosive trap. There were explosives in the passage, or maybe there was a trigger for fireball. Plop. There was a slight noise. Soren's face, which had just revealed a smile of relief, suddenly froze. He was almost flustered and exasperated. I can't believe you're still alive. He clenched his long sword tightly, and his expression gradually became more ruthless. He was going to give it his all. Chapter 16. Shadow Hide. Soren's figure gradually became hazy in the darkness. He clenched his teeth and tore a piece of cloth from his tattered clothes. He then wrapped it around the wound on his leg to strangle it. This would temporarily suppress the injury on his body and slightly reduce the pain when he moved. However, this had to be done in a short period of time. Otherwise, it would worsen the injury. Allocate all the EXP to Rogue. Soren calmly pulled out his sword and began to allocate the EXP. The Slaughter EXP was a type of soul energy, and was also the highest level of EXP. It could be used to level up any profession, including subclasses, class advancement, and so on. At the same time, it could also be used to perform sacrificial ceremonies, summoning ceremonies, and alchemy exchanges. Under normal circumstances, no one would casually use the Slaughter EXP because there were simply too many things that could be used in the future. However, for the current Soren, if he didn't use all his trump cards, he might not have a future. A row of text appeared in front of his eyes. Rogue has leveled up to level 4. Received 24 EX 20 plus INT 18 to 10, *0. 5 skill points, HP increased by 10, profession HP 6 plus, con 18 to 10, *0. 5. Received 1 free attribute point. Soren's pale face regained some color. The 10 HP he received from leveling up his rogue class reduced his injury from heavily injured to moderately injured. This meant that his reflexes weren't weakened, and his stamina consumption rate was also reduced by half. For the time being, his injury wouldn't worsen. He allocated all his skill points to stealth, raising it to 102 points in one go. His figure gradually faded in the darkness. After reaching 100 points in sneak, Soren's Shadow Hide had produced a spell-like effect similar to Blur when he activated it. Unless someone was paying close attention to him, they wouldn't be able to detect his presence. As for the precious free attribute point, Soren gritted his teeth and allocated it to Vitality. There wasn't much of a difference between 20 and 21 points in Dexterity, unless he increased it to 25 points in one go and awakened the legendary ability, Shadow Domain. Otherwise, only by assigning this free attribute to his Vitality could he ensure his greatest survivability. An attribute that was close to Transcendent Constitution meant that his wounds would not be infected and would not continue to worsen. As long as he increased his Constitution a little more, he would have the special ability of Regeneration. This was a must-have ability for high-level adventurers. Soren felt that he had recovered quite a bit of his stamina with the bonus point of Vitality. He carefully moved his feet and began to move towards the bend. There could also be traps nearby. Before he obtained the Trap Sense ability, he could no longer continue to take risks. He had to kill that snake demon. Only then would he have time to slowly recover from his injuries. Otherwise, with the recovery ability of abyssal demons, it was very likely that his situation would become more and more dangerous. There is no smell of gunpowder in the air. Soren moved forward bit by bit, using his past experience to analyze the situation. He gradually approached the tunnel after the explosion. It's probably an explosion trap. It's using a magical device. It might be a fireball spell formation. Without the skill, spell identification, Soren could not sense the elemental energy in the air. However, his experience was still very useful. He saw the snake demon not far away. Its huge body was in a terrible state, and the ground was covered in blood and scales. The snake demon's body was more than 600 pounds, and there was no way for it to dodge in the tunnel. The explosion trap almost directly exploded next to its body. If the snake demon did not have the strong resistance of a demon, it would have been blown to pieces on the spot. However, it was not in a good condition either. White bones could be seen around its waist, and a section of its intestines had fallen to the ground. Its spine was almost completely shattered. If it was not for the special ability of a Transcendent, it would not have been able to survive until now. Hiss. The snake demon hissed. It instantly noticed Soren and looked at him with hatred. Low-level snake demons did not have much ability to speak. Their species determined that only the females had higher intelligence. The four-armed snake demons and below could only speak the low-level demon language. Only spellcasters with sacrificial abilities could understand the common human language and other languages. It wanted to kill the murderer who summoned it to attack it and caused it to become like this. The murderous nature of the abyss demon made it ignore the injuries on its body. It actually forcibly twisted its long and narrow snake tail, wanting to get closer to Soren again. Clang. The snake demon's physical strength was severely reduced due to its severe injuries. It kept growling in pain as it moved its body. Soren easily dodged the sword that was coming at him. He then stabbed the snake demon's chest, where many of its scales had already been blown off. Blat. A stream of hot blood spurted out. Most snake demons were cold-blooded creatures, but there were many snake demons that lived in lava areas. Hiss. Some of the blood splashed onto Soren's body, and he soon felt a burning sensation. His expression changed slightly, and he quickly distanced himself from the snake demon. Acidic blood? The parts that were splashed by the blood already had slight scars, as if they had been stained with diluted sulfuric acid. This was the characteristic of the blood of demons and dragons. The snake demon in front of him should be the descendant of a high-ranked demon. The sword pierced the snake demon's chest, worsening its injuries. It attacked crazily, but it still could not hit the enemy in front of it. The exhaustion of its physical strength had reduced its strength, and the injuries on its body had seriously affected its agility. In its near-death state, it could only fight at less than 30% of its original strength. It's over. Soren once again dodged the snake demon's slash. He then took a deep breath and roared. He jumped up, holding the sword with both hands, and stabbed the snake demon's heart. Die. Soren's eyes were bloodshot. The skull of a demon was abnormally strong. Unless it was holding a rare-grade weapon, the head was not the most fatal weakness. The snake demon's huge body stiffened for a moment. When Soren pulled out the sword, the snake demon's 600-pound body fell to the ground. Blood gushed out and seeped into the nearby ground. Phew. Soren sat on the ground in a sorry state. The consequence of fighting forcefully was that the injury on his leg had worsened. Berserk consumed a lot of stamina. Before one's constitution reached 20 points, Almost no creature could maintain a high-intensity battle for more than half an hour. Even giants, demons, and dragons could not do it. Clap, clap, clap. It's not a high-intensity battle. Stupa. Only when one's constitution reached 20 points and entered the rare grade realm could the consumption and recovery of stamina last for a long time. Soren used his sword to cut open the strangling cloth, and then cut off the flesh that could not be healed. This was a very painful process, but it ensured his recovery speed. A row of data appeared, jump/successfully hit. Additional 12 to 10, strength damage bonus. Dealt 13 piercing damage to target. Target killed. Successfully killed snake demon. Extracted soul energy from target. Received 1800 slaughter EXP, an indescribable heat flowed into Soren's body. This was the soul energy of the target he killed. There was a rumor that the player's hero class template was fixed with the Son of Slaughter ability. They inherited a trace of the God of Slaughter's divine power, which was why they were able to level up much faster than the NPCs in the storyline. There was no way to confirm this theory, but Soren remembered that after mastering the slaughter, soul, and death-related abilities, the slaughter EXP gained from killing an enemy would be increased by 10% to 20%. A short rest. After recovering some of his stamina, Soren began to collect his loot. Demons from the abyss rarely carried money with them, but they could obtain some rare equipment, such as the snake demon's weapon. Soren picked up the 2 long swords immediately. Item identification. Soren looked at the long sword in his hand. It was about 1.5 meters long, and the blade was 10 centimeters wide. There were snake-like patterns on the hilt, and there was a strange rune on it. The body of the sword was faintly red, and when he touched it with his fingers, there seemed to be a trace of burning breath. The blade was very sharp, and its steel was better than normal military weapons. However, it was also much heavier than other weapons. It felt heavy in his hand. A row of data appeared. Item type: Snake Demon Longsword +1 item grade. Rare, grade 1. Item description: a longsword forged with abyssal fire rock. It has a strong slashing and piercing effect, and an additional 1 point of fire damage. Equipment requirement: 14 strength or above. Special effect: small to medium-sized creatures are considered as greatsword type. Strength requirement +2. Not enough strength. This was Soren's first thought when he picked up the longsword. Since the longsword was made for snake demons, its size and weight were far beyond what a normal person could use. Soren could pick up the longsword, but when he swung it around he felt that its weight was a little too heavy, and it affected his combat effectiveness. It was like a normal person could lift an object weighing 50 kilograms, but they couldn't use a weapon that weighed 50 kilograms in battle. By the time they managed to lift it up, they would have been slashed countless times. If one's strength didn't meet the weapon's requirements, it would consume a lot of stamina in battle, and the speed and lethality of the weapon would decrease significantly. The dagger left afterimages in Soren's hand. However, when he swung the long sword, Soren's slashing speed was less than half of his usual speed. Damn it. There's a strength penalty. Soren swung the long sword a dozen times and his arms felt sore and numb. His stamina was also greatly depleted. Clash of the Titans was very demanding in certain aspects. A normal person could walk for 20 kilometers, jog for 10 kilometers, and sprint for less than 1 or 2 kilometers. These things were perfectly simulated in Clash of the Titans, and for a period of time many players cursed. Therefore, when Soren felt the numbness in his arms, he immediately knew that there would be a strength penalty when he wielded the longsword. Although there was no data to show it, Soren could calculate the strength penalty in his mind. Accuracy -4, damage -4, attack speed -4, stamina consumption +200%. Originally he could last for 10 minutes, but now he estimated that he wouldn't even last 2 minutes. He smiled bitterly. Soren put down the snake demon longsword with a bitter smile. After all, it was a weapon used by an enemy that weighed more than 600 pounds. It was almost as heavy as a greatsword used by humans. His current physique and stamina were good enough, but if he didn't have enough strength he might as well use a normal dagger. A normal longsword weighed around 2 to 3 kilograms, but this longsword was at least 15 kilograms. 2 swords would weigh 30 kilograms. If he added some refined iron, it would weigh as much as a young woman. Without the template of a previous hero class, Soren couldn't allocate more than 18 points of strength. His current 12 points of strength was only enough for him to wield normal weapons. After all, under the strength penalty he couldn't even use half of his strength. Looks like I'll have to think of a way to sell them. Soren carried the snake demon longswords on his back. The weight of 30 kilograms made him feel heavy, and he felt that his 12 points of strength wasn't enough. However, he had to bring the longswords out. The market price of a Grade 1 rare grade weapon was more than 100 Kindler coins. The snake demon longsword was a great sword, and its value would increase by 20 to 50%. In other words, these two Grade 1 rare grade longswords were worth about 300 Kindler coins. If he sold them, he would be able to live comfortably. Chapter 17. The snake demon's corpse was actually quite valuable. For example, its skin could be peeled off to make a Grade 1 enchanted leather armor. Its heart was the favorite of many spellcasters, and its blood could even be used as an alchemy material. However, there was a more troublesome thing. It was difficult to sell demon-type items, at least in the southern cities. In comparison, weapons were easier to sell. Moreover, Soren couldn't take so many items with him. Once the information about the snake demon was leaked, it would most likely lead to an investigation by the church. Summoning a demon to the material plane would result in a trial. Raise rogue level. Soren treated his wounds and immediately raised his rogue level again. He didn't have any healing potions on him, so he could only rely on his profession level to recover. At the very least, he could rely on the increase of his HP to reduce his injuries to a light injury status. A row of data appeared. Rogue profession raised to level 5. Received 24 DX 20 plus INT 18 to 10, *0. 5. Skill points, HP increased by 11, profession HP 6 plus, con 19 to 10, *0. 5. Learned combat skill, Shadow Strike. Rogue profession level raised to Grade 2. Received the potential for a bloodline purification ritual. Received an additional profession ability. Soren glanced at it and didn't pay attention to anything else. The increase from Grade 1 to Grade 2 was more obvious. The former belonged to the small gangs in the city, while the latter had the qualifications to leave the city for adventures. Grade 2 professions could receive an additional profession ability point, but it was limited to the profession ability. For example, Soren was a rogue, so he could receive an additional rogue profession ability. He couldn't receive any other profession ability or individual ability. All the skill points were allocated to traps. This treasure cave hadn't been fully explored yet, so Soren wanted to strengthen his trap detection ability. A Grade 2 rogue had 3 profession abilities to choose from. They were Blind Battle, Proficiency. After hiding in the shadows for a long time, the bandit has gradually gotten used to fighting in the dark. His fighting style is no longer limited to sight. Hearing, intuition, smell, and so on have become his judgment factors in battle. Even in complete darkness, the bandit can still have a good fighting strength. Evasion +1, Accuracy +1. Military Weapons, Proficiency. After a long period of training, the professional is able to use all military weapons, including but not limited to long swords, great swords, machetes, crossbows, two-handed greatswords, spears, flails, and so on. When using military weapons in battle, a professionist would be able to use them with ease, knowing how to use them to deal more damage and how to hit the enemy more easily. Hit +1, Damage +1, Dodging, Proficiency. Rogues have learned how to use their dexterity in long-term battles. They can do many moves that ordinary people can't do to avoid attacks. Evade +1, Reflex +1. Without a doubt, he chose the military weapon, Mastery, which was the first talent he had obtained. This was a very important class specialty. Most melee professions had to master it, because it meant that they could use most weapons skillfully to deal with unexpected situations during adventures. Moreover, it was the prerequisite for learning many basic combat skills. For example, the combat skill, Sword Form, Heavy Hack, after mastering the basic swordsmanship, required the prerequisite of Mastery of Military Weapons. This was the specialty of a warrior. Basically, it could be obtained after the advancement. Soren didn't have the time to train for a long time, so he could only obtain it through talent points. It was normal training. It would take 1 or 2 years to obtain this specialty to fully familiarize himself with all military weapons. This time was enough for him to do many things. As for the last bloodline purification potential, it was something that only the rich could afford. In short, it was to purify one's bloodline potential. According to the current constitution, one would gain a new HP calculation and cleanse the impurities in one's body. For example, Soren's current HP was 52 points. If he held a bloodline purification ceremony, then his HP would be Profession HP 6 plus, 19 to 10, *5 plus 19 Constitution plus 10 base HP equals 84 HP. It was equivalent to 3 more profession levels of HP. It was a very strong bloodline enhancement, but it was also very expensive. The advancement ceremony would cost more than 1,000 Kindler coins. This ceremony could be held once for each advancement. The biggest increase should be after the advancement into a legendary profession. This was because after the bloodline purification ceremony, one would obtain the special talent of legendary life. This was the key to many melee professions being able to face an adult giant dragon head-on. The bloodline purification ceremony. Soren didn't think about it for the time being because this ceremony was the same whenever it was held. It just increased one's HP according to their constitution and profession level. This kind of ceremony required a lot of rare materials. At the same time, it also required the basic skills of spell identification and knowledge. It was very difficult to meet its requirements in the early stages. After all, there was once a warlock teammate who wanted to advance into a dragon disciple, but Soren's entire team emptied their personal savings. 1,000 Kindler coins was a conservative expenditure. This money was enough for Soren to equip himself and double his combat strength. At this moment, after Soren became a grade 2 rogue, his stats changed. Name: Soren. Race: half-elf. Attributes: Strength 12, Dexterity 20, +1, Constitution 19, Intelligence 18, +1, Wisdom 15, Charm 16. Alignment: Lawful Evil. Profession: Level 10 Commoner, Max, /Level 5 Rogue. 03000, Grade 2. HP 5 252 EXP 950, Slaughter EXP 0, Profession EXP. Unassigned skill points, none. Attribute points, none. Status: Normal. Profession skills: Sneak 102, Steal 35, Pick Lock 45, Snare 54. Legendary skills: Omnipotent Hands, Sealed, Weakened. Personal abilities: Nimble Left Hand, Eidetic. Memory, Perseverance. Profession abilities: Grasp of Shadows. Military weapon, Proficiency. Combat skills: Shadow Strike. After advancing into Grade 2, the amount of EXP needed to increase one's strength had increased tremendously. However, at the same time he had also mastered a powerful combat skill, which was the Shadow Strike ability that Soren had been looking forward to. Shadow Strike, combat skill. Advanced rogues have gradually touched upon the power of the Shadow Domain. When attacking an enemy, they can rely on their mastery of the Shadow Domain to launch a spell-like attack. Shadow Strike can be activated at the same time as Backstab, dealing an additional 5 shadow damage that ignores physical defense. This ability can increase damage by 1 for every rogue level, increasing the number of times it can be used. Requires the rogue's prerequisite ability, Grasp of Shadows. This was a very powerful ability. With Soren's current level as a rogue, he could use Shadow Strike 5 times a day. As long as the enemy did not have shadow resistance, it would deal 5 shadow damage that ignores physical defense. This was a fatal threat to the relatively weak HP of low-level professions in the early stages. Grade 2 was a watershed. Wizards began to master level 3 arcane spells, and finally broke away from their low combat strength. Warriors began to master Aura Slash in preparation for advancing into Knights, Sword Saints and Weapon Masters. Monks had more or less mastered Chi, and whether they wanted to advance into Ascetics or Fist Masters in the future, they needed to lay a good foundation. Basically, all professions would have a huge improvement after reaching Grade 2. Rogues also began to specialize from this point, whether it was the Godly Thief, the Lurker, or the Assassin who was proficient in assassination techniques. All of them had to decide their future now. However, Soren had no plans to advance into a profession at the moment. Not to mention the harsh conditions required to advance into a profession. Just the 5,000 Slaughter EXP required to advance into a profession was enough to make him flinch. The NPCs in the storyline needed a long time to train to advance into a profession. Although Soren had skipped this step, he needed to use Slaughter EXP Soul Energy to make up for it. Advancing into a profession was not necessarily a good thing. The Godly Thief's combat strength was low, the Lurker's explosive power was not enough, and the Assassin's killing power was high, but their overall abilities were not good. In terms of survivability, rogues were still the strongest. At the very least, before he had more than 10 personal abilities, any other profession would not be as useful as a basic profession. Of course, If you had dozens of personal abilities including but not limited to personal abilities, profession abilities, innate abilities and so on, you would be very powerful no matter what profession you advanced into. For example, unarmed combat, grandmaster, one-inch punch, legendary, blind battle, legendary, super sixth sense, instinctive evasion, legendary, conditioned reflex, legendary, and so on. As long as you wanted to, you could even take down an army by yourself while running naked with your eyes closed. After all, profession level was only a part of one's strength. In a life and death battle, it depended on your overall strength. It was not just profession level but also the strength of your attributes, the ability of your abilities, and the lowest wooden board in the bucket. The lowest wooden board in the bucket determined how much water it could hold. That was the key to whether you could reach the realm of legends. Chapter 18. Time passed bit by bit. Soren's stamina was slowly recovering. The wound on his thigh was starting to feel numb and itchy. This meant that his 19 points of vitality was starting to take effect. The wound was slowly healing, but it still wasn't as effective as rebirth. If he were to rest, the wound would be completely healed in a day or two. However, Soren couldn't afford to wait that long. He didn't care about the wound tearing open again and continued to explore the cave. The snake demon's sword was placed at the entrance. The weight of the two swords was so heavy that Soren felt like he was wearing a full body armor. It greatly affected his speed. He also took back the card of manifestation. It was a special item and it might be useful if he kept it with him. He pulled out the bolts from the snake demon's body one by one and reloaded them. If there was a battle later, the crossbow would save him a lot of trouble. There were 2 forked passages in the cave. He had only explored one of them and there should be another passage that led to a secret room. The traps in the passage were almost all triggered. However, Soren didn't dare to be careless. He explored the passage inch by inch and found another trap behind a stone wall. It was a spike trap. If triggered, a row of sharp blades would come out from the ground, smeared with poison. A gust of cold wind blew past. This side of the passage should be connected to the surface. There was still a faint light coming from it. The air was filled with the smell of antiseptic. It smelled a little like formalin, but it was much stronger. There was also a faint smell of blood. Soren's expression became serious. He put his hand on the hilt of his sword and walked along the passage. Some corpses appeared in his sight, and their bodies were wrapped in bandages. Mummies? The scene in front of him triggered his memory. It was a record of hundreds of adventures. Mummy, undead, grade 2. Challenge rating, level 3 monster level, 6 spell-like abilities, highest and lowest attributes, 18 and 5 total attribute points, 65-75, specialty, undead constitution, negative energy corrosion difficulty, D+. There was a slight noise. As expected, when Soren got closer, 2 or 3 of the corpses started moving. Their movements were very stiff and slow. Their movement speed was even slower than that of a child's. These were ordinary mummies without any superpowers. They only had the basic talents of undead creatures. Mummies had very low agility, but their strength was above that of an adult. Because of the extraordinary characteristics of the undead, their constitution was conservatively estimated to be above 15 points. Therefore they were the meat shields of the low-level undead, second only to zombies. Swish! A row of crossbow bolts flew out. The mummy at the front was hit in an instant. 6 crossbow bolts penetrated its body, and it swayed for a moment before falling to the ground. Undead creatures had undead energy in their bodies. By dispersing this energy they could be killed. However, one thing to note was that many undead creatures had negative energy corrosive effects. If one was scratched by them, it was very likely that they would be infected with diseases or suffer additional corrosive damage from undead energy. If only there was a priest. A thought flashed through Soren's mind, and he immediately drew his sword and charged forward. The mummy's movements were slow, so it was the easiest enemy for him to deal with. Clang, clang, clang. Soren's figure moved around the remaining 2 mummies. Even if his legs were slightly injured, these mummies could not attack him at all. The agility of the low-level mummies was basically below 10 points. As long as he moved around them, he could slowly dismantle them. Of course, if you encountered an ancient mummy, it would be a tragedy. The ancient mummy's challenge rating was 12, and its level was 18. Its agility was conservatively estimated to be above 21 points. In many ancient ruins, the ancient mummy was an adventurer's nightmare. After a short battle, Soren quickly dismantled the mummy in front of him using his agility, and received 300 slaughter EXP. He originally wanted to retrieve the crossbow bolts, but after seeing the rotten flesh on the mummy's body, he gave up on the idea. This was not only because it was disgusting but more importantly, undead creatures were really disgusting. Behind the mummy was a door. After Soren pushed it open, he immediately saw many corpses, and some human-like organs soaked in an unknown liquid. The smell of blood became stronger. On the workbench there was a jar of dark red liquid, and a fist-sized eyeball was soaked in it. An unknown eye stalk. Soren could not tell what it was, so he did not plan to take it with him. The secret room was filled with undead energy. Because the Lich had once cast a spell here, negative energy would gather here to a certain extent, and it was not a good thing for any living creature. If one stayed here for too long, they would be exposed to undead energy radiation. The negative energy field here could only be dispelled after a priest purified it. After checking for traps, Soren began to rummage through the cabinets in search of valuable items. He found a few books, some records of strange symbols, more than 10 gold dirhams and a strange bracer. The books were all information. Soren glanced at them and put them away. He had an eidetic memory, and if he brought them back they should be able to increase his knowledge skill points. Because Soren did not receive any education, he did not awaken any knowledge skill points. At the very least, he needed to be able to understand most of the common languages in order to obtain the corresponding knowledge skill. This was a good thing for someone with the scholar class as they were born with 25 knowledge skill points. The strange symbols were the experiment records. They were probably recorded in a special secret language. Soren's knowledge skill points were not enough, and he did not know how to identify spells, so he could not read these records. And it seemed like they were all research on the creation of undead creatures. These things were not useful to him and he would not be able to get rid of them, so he just left them where they were. Finally there was the strange bracer. He was familiar with this item, and after trying to identify it, its information was displayed. Item type, Ogre Bracer of Strength. Item grade, Rare, Grade 1. Item description, a special item made from the skin of an ogre. After wearing it, it can increase the user's strength to the level of an ogre. Equipment requirements, none. Equipment effect, Strength +2. Strength can be increased to a maximum of 18 points. It's actually this item? Soren's face showed a hint of surprise, and he immediately wore it on his wrist. The Ogre Bracer of Strength was the most popular item in the early stages of the game. There were a total of 3 pieces in this set: the Ogre Bracer of Strength, the Ogre Gloves of Strength, and the Ogre Belt of Strength. Each piece of equipment could increase strength by 2 points, but the maximum was 18 points. In other words, it was useless if the user's strength exceeded 18 points. In the past, this item was completely useless to him. Because the players inherited the hero class template, their initial stats were as high as 90 points, and most melee players had 18 points of strength. This kind of equipment was meant for mages and magic kind class players. But for the current Soren, this Ogre Bracer of Strength was very useful because after wearing it he could just barely use the Snake Demon Longsword. Even if there was still a penalty of 2 points of strength. If it was a necromancer, there should be a lot of valuable things here. However, Soren had no interest in those body parts. He packed the books and gold coins and took them away, leaving the other things in their original place. After calculating the time, he had already spent half a day here, and it should be dark outside. Soren's rations were all gone because of the Thieving God card, and he was quite hungry after a long battle. 2 Snake Demon Longswords. More than 10 Kindler, 3 books, 3 cards and 1 Ogre Bracer of Strength. Soren was quite satisfied with the loot from this adventure, even though there were some accidents that almost cost him his life. But if he could sell these loot, it should be enough for him and Vivian to become free citizens. At the same time he also bought some necessities. For example, a small multidimensional bag with 3 feet of storage space. This was a necessary item for adventuring in the wild. It was worth around 100 Kindler. It was sold in secret shops in every city, and it could be used to store some daily necessities. It was impossible to carry everything back from an adventure in the wild, so the small multidimensional bag had about 1 cubic meter of storage space, which was enough to store some of the loot. Otherwise, 20 Kindler would weigh 1 pound, and sometimes the Kindler alone would weigh 1 to 200 pounds. Are you sure you can still walk with all these Kindler on your back? Creak. The heavy secret door slowly opened, and Soren appeared with 2 long swords on his back and a small bag on his back. It was packed with the clothes of the dead. He looked around vigilantly and then headed toward Amber City. As soon as he walked out of the mass grave, he heard a faint moaning sound coming from in front of him. It was a woman's moaning. Because it was very quiet, the sound traveled quite far. He silently put his hand on the hilt of his sword and pulled it out from his back. His muscles tensed up and he looked around, ready to fight. This was a mass grave. Who would come here in the middle of the night to have sex? There was a limit to the thrill and the hardcore. He was afraid that he had encountered something unclean. Chapter 19. Soren saw a woman. Or rather, it was a seductive woman who wore revealing clothes. She had light blonde hair, and her exposed skin was unusually pale. She was leaning against a tree, and a young man was kissing her with his head lowered. Most of her white breasts were exposed, and under the cold moonlight, one could even see the light green veins on her body. Soren's footsteps were very light. But the seductive woman still easily noticed him. She raised her head and revealed her green eyes. She stuck out her tongue and licked her dark red lips. She playfully said, "It seems that I'm very lucky today." The young man who was enjoying himself in front of her chest didn't notice her at all. It was as if the fullness in front of him had attracted all of his attention. Soren stopped. He stared at the seductive woman not far away. She didn't move, so he didn't move either. She was a blood descendant. A servant raised by vampires. Her strength was far stronger than a low-level blood thrall. Although there were many stories that glorified vampires in the eyes of adventurers, they were still dangerous and evil creatures. A blood descendant's challenge rating was 8, and their level was 16. They belonged to the silver species and had powerful spell-like abilities. A blood descendant's challenge rating was 6, and their level was 12. They had some of the vampire's abilities. Vampires were masters in controlling negative energy. Their reproduction had a strict hierarchy. Many creatures that were considered as vampires in the outside world were actually blood descendants of a lower level. These creatures that didn't inherit the true blood needed a long time to reach the standard of a blood descendant. The fangs of vampires had a deadly poison. Although they secretly manipulated many scholars to glorify the dark pleasure of being sucked blood, it still couldn't change the fact that the victim would gradually be eroded by the poison and become a blood thrall. This poison would turn humans into half-undead creatures. Their consciousness would gradually disappear, and they would eventually become monsters that supplied blood. They were dangerous and deadly. Soren had fought vampires more than once. Vampires were one of the most active creatures in the dark domain. They could be found in almost every city. High-level vampires would disguise themselves as human nobles, while low-level vampires would hide in basements, sewers, and graveyards. They were like predators in the dark. There was a brief silence. The young man in front of the seductive woman's chest seemed to be engulfed in lust. He did not notice that the atmosphere around him had become heavy and oppressive. He was under the spell of charm person, and his mind had long been burned by lust and fire. Mind-type spells required a flaw in the target's willpower. Vampires were best at using their appearance to confuse their prey, using teasing to arouse their desires, and finally lowering their target's willpower. Then, in an instant, they could cast a charm spell to control their target's mind. Willpower was a force. A strong will could even affect the elemental energy of nature. Soren didn't pay any attention to the pitiful prey. He was calculating his chances of winning against the Bloodkin. The Bloodkin's agility was probably higher than his, and its strength was far beyond the range of a normal person. Furthermore, the Bloodkin had a strong sense of evasion. In terms of strength, it wasn't any weaker than the snake demon from the abyss. Taking into account the injuries on his legs, Soren concluded that he had no chance of winning. Then, there was only one way. Soren slightly bent down and put the index and middle fingers of his left hand on his collarbone. He slowly said, "Shadow shroud the world. The masked messenger in the darkness is watching us. Glory. Return to the invisible ruler." The seductive woman's playful smile gradually disappeared. She slightly frowned and looked deeply at Soren in front of her. She said in a deep voice, "Night will decide our fate. The ancestors will guide us. Mistress of the night. Protect her followers. Success." Soren's heart was filled with joy, but his expression didn't change at all. He slightly nodded and took a step back to show that he didn't have any ill intentions. At the same time, he bowed and said, "Esteemed mistress. May the night always watch over you. Please enjoy your dinner in peace. No one will disturb you." After saying that, he turned around and left in another direction. The seductive woman kept looking at his back. Her expression seemed to have a trace of hesitation, but in the end she gave up on the plan in her heart. Her eyes fell on the young man who was wantonly ravaging her chest. She opened her mouth, revealing her sharp fangs. Her expression showed a trace of greed and desire. She deeply pierced the prey's artery. Large amounts of blood flowed into her mouth. The seductive woman's face showed a trace of satisfaction and intoxication. The young man in her arms still didn't notice. He was still immersed in the pleasure and didn't know that death was coming. A hungry blood descendant. It was difficult for the prey to survive until the dawn of the next day. From beginning to end. Soren didn't even look at the poor man until he left the mass grave. Only then did he collapse and let out a long sigh of relief. The words he just said were the code of the Shadow Mask. It was a powerful organization that controlled the Grey Realm. The Dark Realm and the Grey Realm intersected the most. The number of times the thieves dealt with the Dark Realm was not small. If the other side didn't respond, then a battle was inevitable. But if the other side responded, it meant that she knew about the existence of the Shadow Mask. It was very likely that this battle would be avoided. What Soren just said was actually a code. The former meant that he was a member of the Shadow Mask organization, including his gestures and language. The latter meant that he believed in the Shadow Master. Only the core members knew that the Shadow Master didn't have a physical body. Similarly, the Blood Descendant understood the meaning of the code, which was why she had hesitated before making a move. In the end, she chose to let Soren leave. From the other side's code, Soren knew that she was a blood descendant raised by a high-grade vampire who had the bloodline of an ancestor. At the same time, she was also a follower of the Mistress of the Night. The Shadow Master was an ally of the Mistress of the Night. The relationship between the two gods was quite good, so there were very few conflicts between their followers. If you added the fear of the Shadow Mask, then it was enough to make the other side give up on this extra hunting plan. More importantly, Soren's attitude clearly indicated that he would let her enjoy her dinner. He didn't have the slightest intention of meddling in other people's business. He took a step back to show that he didn't have any hostility and didn't want to fight. The hidden meaning was that since she had already found her dinner, did she really want to take the risk of offending the Shadow Mask by hunting a follower of the Shadow Master? Of course. Soren wasn't a member of the Shadow Mask, nor was he a follower of the Shadow Master. He was actually lying. But this should be the best way. The only way to solve problems wasn't to fight. If Soren was an idiot who only knew how to fight, he wouldn't have been able to reach the legendary realm. In this world where saints walked everywhere and liches were as common as dogs, there were countless existences that were stronger than him. Even the possibility of encountering a god was very high, defeating the strong with the weak. Sometimes there was no other way. For example, when encountering those chaotic and evil demons, these creatures had their own crazy attributes and were very difficult to negotiate with. So when the situation allowed, there were many times when you had to learn how to avoid fighting. At the very least, you could avoid those battles where you had no chance of winning, until he was sure that he was safe. Soren finally let out a sigh of relief. At the same time, he found that there seemed to be something new on his status page. The first sentence seemed to have appeared when he left the treasure cave. At that time, he was alerted by the strange sound and didn't see this message. What appeared was, exploration successful. After a difficult underground adventure, your skills have improved to a certain extent. Sneak +1, trap +1. These were the words in the first row. Then, there were the words that appeared after he escaped from the Blood Descendants and avoided a battle where he had no chance of winning. What was displayed here was, negotiation successful. You successfully deceived a powerful Blood Descendant. You avoided a battle. Negotiation +1, deception +3, performance +1. A row of data appeared. Then, Soren found that on his status page, other than the original thief skills, there were some additional skills. Basic skills: Sneak 103, Steal 35, Picklock 45, Trap 55, Negotiation 1, Deception 3, Performance 1. This works too? Soren's face showed a hint of surprise. You're tuning in to the Han Lee's Wuxia Chronicles YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.